You've entered another mysterious chapter with Mr. Geronimo. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and comment your country below. The river was speaking to me, and there was no river within 1.5 miles of where I stood. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else, because it is the one thing I have never been able to explain away, I have spent a long time trying. I have told myself it was wind moving through the red spruce, or water under the peat, or my own blood loud in my ears after a hard climb. None of those things sound like a river that knows your name. None of them wait for you to answer. I was a backcountry ranger in the Monongahela for 19 years. I knew that ground the way you know the inside of your own mouth, without looking, without thinking. I knew where the fog pooled and where it lifted. I knew which hollows held the cold all summer, and which bogs would take your boot to the shin and not give it back. I had pulled people out of that forest who were grateful, and I had carried out a few who were past being anything at all. I thought by my last summer up there that the mountains and I had reached an understanding. I was wrong about that, the way you are wrong about a person you have known your whole life and never once truly looked at. People think a forest is a place. It is not a place. It is a long, patient argument between water and stone, and the men and women who walk into it are not part of that argument. They are only weather passing through. The Monongahela taught me that slowly, over 19 summers and 19 winters, and I had come to believe that the lesson was the whole of it. Respect the water, respect the cold, respect the way distance behaves up high, where a ridge that looks like an hour will cost you a day. I built my whole life on those lessons, and they were good lessons, and they kept a great many people alive. But there is a thing they do not teach you in the training. A thing the old rangers only ever say at the end of a long night, when the coffee is gone and a person has earned it. They say the forest is not the worst thing in the forest. They say it the way you would warn a child, quiet, hoping the child never has cause to remember it. Paula said it to me once, my first autumn, and I laughed, because I was young and I did not yet know that the men who survive the longest in wild country are the ones who are most afraid, and who have learned exactly the right thing to be afraid of. The day it began, I was checking permits at the high trailhead above Red Creek, where the spruce gives way to the open heath and the wind comes across the bog with nothing to slow it. It was July, and it was cold, the way that country is always a little cold even in July, as if the season is a rumor that never quite reaches the top. 6 people came up the trail toward me in a loose line, and I knew before they reached me that 2 of them did not belong to that altitude. You learn to read it in the legs. Bradley Carpenter was at the front, 45, and built like a man who lifts things for a living, with a permit folded into a plastic sleeve and a grin he had clearly practiced. He shook my hand too hard. He told me they were a reunion, family and old friends, and that some of them had walked this country back in the days before the trails had names. He said it the way men say things they want you to be impressed by. Behind him came Crystal Rice, 57, lean and quiet and quick to count heads. I liked her at once. She had the calm of someone who has been the responsible one in every group she has ever joined, and she was already watching the sky the way I was watching it. Then the older ones. Vincent Powell was 70 that summer, and he had walked the Monongahela since before it had a single blazed trail, and you could see it in him, the way the land had folded itself into the lines of his face. Phyllis Bryant was 73, small and upright, with 2 hearing aids she kept fussing with, tapping them, turning them, as if the mountain were a radio she could not quite tune. Leon Patterson was 61 and said almost nothing, which I have learned to respect, because the quiet ones are usually the ones still alive at the end. And Monica Long was 38, the youngest, Bradley's cousin, with a warmth to her that filled the whole trailhead, and a habit I noticed inside of 5 minutes and have never stopped thinking about since. Monica answered everything. A bird called, and she called back to it. A marmot whistled from the rocks, and she whistled at it, laughing. Bradley said her name from 40 feet off, and she turned at once every time, like a hand reaching for a phone. She could not let a sound go unanswered. It was a kind of generosity, I think. She wanted everything that called to her to know it had been heard. I have met a few people like that in my life. I do not meet many of them anymore. I gave them the talk I gave everyone. Stay together. Filter your water. Watch the weather, because the weather up there does not care about your plans. And then I gave them the other talk, the one I did not give to everyone, because most people do not have the patience for an old ranger and his stories, and because saying it out loud always made me feel foolish, right up until the summer it did not. I told them about the fog. I told them that the fog in the high bogs of the Monongahela was not like other fog, that it came up out of the ground and not down out of the sky. that it pooled in the hollows the way water pools, and that on certain evenings it carried sound in ways that were not natural, voices from miles off, clear as if they stood beside you. And I told them the rule I had learned from the man who trained me, an old district ranger named Hollis who had it from someone older than himself, passed hand to hand up there since before anyone thought to write it down. Do not answer what calls you by name in the fog. Bradley laughed. I expected him to, but Vincent Powell did not laugh. Vincent looked at me for a long moment with those folded eyes, and then he said it back to me, word for word, the way you finish a prayer you learned as a child. Do not answer what calls you by name in the fog, he said. My grandmother told me that on this very mountain, she had a name for the thing that did the calling. She called it the Mananji. He said the word the old way, with the weight on the front of it, the way you say the name of a place and not the name of a thing, and that was the first time I understood that to the people who had been on this mountain longest. The creature and the country were not two different things. The river was named for it, or it was named for the river. Nobody living could say which came first. Vincent told me his grandmother had said the Mananji was older than the trees, older than the name of the river, that it had been in the wet hollows of these mountains since before the first people walked up out of the valleys to hunt the high meadows, and that it had only ever wanted one thing, which was company, and had only ever had one way of getting it. It called, and the kind ones answered, and the kind ones did not come back, and the mountain kept its quiet, and the river ran brown and slow and full. Phyllis tapped her hearing aid and asked what he had said, and Vincent waved it off, and Bradley laughed again and steered them all toward the trail, and the moment passed the way those moments do. But I watched Vincent as he walked away, and Vincent watched the bog, and neither of us was laughing. I should have turned them around right there. I have gone over it 1,000 times. The weather was wrong, the cold was wrong, and there was a smell on the wind that I had been telling myself for 10 minutes was just the peat, river silt and rot, the smell of a riverbank in high summer, of mud and dead fish and slow brown water. We were 1.5 miles above any water that ran. I told myself it was the peat. I told myself a lot of things that summer. There was one more thing, and I left it out of my report, and I have never forgiven myself for leaving it out. On my way up the fire road that afternoon I had found a deer, a young buck, freshly dead, with no mark on it that I could see, no wound, no torn throat, nothing that a coyote or a cat would leave. It was lying in the middle of the heath in the open, well away from any cover, which is not where deer die. Deer die in the thickets, hidden, the way everything wild tries to be hidden at the end. This one was lying on its side in the open with its legs folded under it, neat, almost peaceful, and its head was turned back over its own shoulder, turned all the way back, so that its open eyes were looking behind it, down the slope, toward the bog, as if the last thing it had done was answer something that called it from below. I stood over that deer for a long minute with the cold coming up out of the ground, and then I told myself a healthy young buck can drop from 100 quiet things, and I got back in my truck, and I drove up to check the permits of 6 people I was about to let walk into the worst night of all our lives. I let them go. That is the part I carry. I let them go up into the heath with the light already starting to think about leaving, and I told myself I would check on them on my evening round, and I went back to my truck to write up the permits. It was nearly dusk when I drove the fire road up along the ridge and parked where I could see their fire down in the hollow, a small orange wound in the gray. The fog was coming up. I could see it filling the low ground around them, rising slow, the way milk rises in a glass when you pour it careful. I had my window down. The cold came in and the smell came in with it, river silt and rot, stronger now, thick enough to taste. And then, from somewhere down in that rising fog, a voice said a name. It was not one of their names. That is what stopped my heart. It was not Bradley or Crystal or Vincent or any of them. The voice in the fog called out for Hollis. It called the name of the old district ranger who had trained me, who had taught me the rule, who had been in the ground for 11 years. It called for him soft and patient, the way you call a dog that has wandered, the way you call someone you are sure will come. And down in the hollow, by the fire, I saw every one of those 6 people go still. They had heard it too. Even Phyllis, who heard almost nothing, had turned her head and was reaching up to tap at the side of her skull, and I watched her mouth form the words I could not hear from where I sat. Why has everyone gone so quiet? I went down to them. I want that on the record because there is an easy version of this story where the ranger sits in his truck and watches and lives, and that is not what happened. I took my pack and my light and my radio and I went down the slope into the hollow, into the rising fog, because that is the job, and because I had heard my dead teacher's name spoken in a voice that was not human, and I needed it to be a coyote, or a screech owl, or anything at all that I could write in a report and forget. By the time I reached their fire, the fog was at our waists, cold and slow, and the smell was everywhere. Bradley met me with the grin gone off his face. He was glad to see a uniform. People always are, right up until the uniform turns out to be just a frightened man like them. I counted them by the firelight the way Crystal had been counting them all day, a habit you do not lose. 6. All present. But they were not the same people who had laughed at me at the trailhead. Something in that hollow had already begun to take the edges off them. Bradley was talking too much. Crystal was talking not at all. Leon was looking at the spruce wall where the firelight gave out, and looking at it, the way you watch a door you are sure you heard open. Phyllis had her hearing aids out and turned down low in her palm, and when I asked her why, she told me, in that clear, too loud voice that the deaf use because they cannot hear themselves, that with the aids in, the fog made a sound she could not stand, a slow, wet sliding, like something heavy turning over in mud, and that she would rather hear nothing at all than hear that. I told her that was a wise choice, and I meant it more than she knew. And Monica, who could not sit still while a person nearby was frightened, kept up a soft running stream of comfort, answering every nervous thing anyone said, answering Bradley, answering the fire when it popped, answering a far-off sound none of the rest of us had even noticed yet, calling back a gentle hello to the gray as easily as breathing, and I felt the cold go right down through me. Because of all the people on that mountain, she was the one the fog would not have to work for at all. They had heard the voice. They argued about it the way people argue about a thing they are afraid of, loudly, to fill the silence. Bradley said it was another group camped over the next ridge. Crystal said there was no other group. She had checked the register, and Crystal was right, and we both knew she was right. Leon said nothing and fed the fire. Phyllis sat very close to it with her hearing aids out, cupped in her hand like two small frightened animals, because she had told the others in her clear, too loud voice that she could not bear the way the things made the fog sound. A wet sliding sound, a sound she did not have a word for, and Vincent Powell sat apart from all of them, at the edge of the firelight, looking out into the gray, and when I crouched beside him he spoke without turning his head. My grandmother lost a brother on this mountain, he said, 1891. They were running cattle up in the high meadows and the fog came up and her brother heard their mother calling him home. Their mother was 9 miles down the mountain in a kitchen. He answered her. He called back, "I am coming, Mama." And he walked off into the fog toward a voice that could not have been there, and they never found one bone of him. Vincent looked at me then. "It learns the voices we love," he said. "That is how it does it. It does not call you with a stranger's voice. It calls you with the voice of the one person you would cross any distance to reach. And the only thing that saves you, the only thing, is that it cannot make you go to it. You have to come to it on your own. It needs you to answer. So you do not answer, no matter who you hear. No matter how sure you are, you do not answer what calls you by name in the fog." I have thought a great deal, in the years since, about what kind of mercy it is that a thing like that should have such a rule. That the worst thing on that mountain still has to ask. I do not think it is mercy. I think it is patience. I think a hunter that has all the time in the world does not need to chase. It only needs to wait by the water and call, and trust that sooner or later something tender will answer. The fog took Vincent first, and it took him because he was the only one who fully understood, and I think the thing knew that. It does not want the ones who do not believe in it. They are too easy and not worth the breath. It wants the ones who know exactly what they are hearing and answer anyway because they are kind, or because they are tired, or because the voice is the voice of someone they have been waiting their whole lives to hear one more time. Around 2 in the morning the fog had risen over our heads and the fire was a smear of orange in the gray and we could not see one another except as shapes, and out of that gray, clear as a bell, came a woman's voice, an old woman, gentle, calling, "Vincent, Vincent, honey, come help me with the gate." And Vincent Powell, 70 years old, who knew better than any man alive what that voice was, who had told me himself not an hour before exactly how this thing worked, stood up from beside the fire. I saw his face in the last of the light. He was smiling. He was crying. He looked the way a man looks when a door he thought was closed forever swings open. "That is my wife," he said. "That is my Ruth." I grabbed his sleeve. I told him no. Crystal had him by the other arm. He was an old man, and we were two strong adults, and it did not matter at all. He went into the fog with a strength I cannot describe, the strength of 40 years of wanting, and the gray closed over him, and we heard him say, clear and glad, I am coming, Ruthie, I am coming. And then we heard the wet sliding sound, the sound Phyllis did not have a word for. And then we heard nothing at all. I need to stop here for one moment, because if you have come with us this far down into the fog, if you are still standing at this fire, then I want you to know you have not yet tapped the like on this video, and I am asking you to do it now, in the quiet, before the next part, because what comes next is the part I have never told anyone, and it helps to know someone is out there in the gray with me. Reach out and do that, and then come back to the fire. I will wait. We did not sleep. You do not sleep after that. We sat with our backs to the fire and our faces to the fog, and we waited for the night to end, and the fog did not let it end. It called all night. It learned us fast. By 3 it was calling in Vincent's voice, his glad warm come on. The water is fine. Calling for Phyllis, for Crystal, for all of us by name. Phyllis sat with her hearing aids out and heard none of it and watched our faces and understood everything from our faces, which was its own kind of horror, to be the only one who could not hear the thing and to read its progress in the eyes of the people you love. I had my handheld radio, and somewhere past 3 I tried it. I do not know what I expected. There is no signal up in that bowl, there never has been, and I knew it. But a frightened man reaches for the tools in his hands the way a drowning man reaches for water. I keyed it and asked for anyone, and instead of static the radio gave me back my own voice, not an echo. There is no echo on a radio. It gave me back, clear and calm, the talk I had given them at the trailhead that afternoon, my own words in my own voice. Stay together, filter your water, watch the weather. It played it back to me out of the little speaker in the gloom while the same fog that had eaten Vincent pressed against my back, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind will say it, that the Manunji had been listening at the trailhead, that it had stood somewhere in the spruce while I gave my talk, and it had taken my voice the way it took everything, and it was showing me now, gently, that it had me too. I turned the radio off. I did not turn it on again. Twice in that long gray I saw it, or saw enough of it to wish I had not. The fog would thin for a moment where it should not, the way a curtain stirs when something passes behind it, and there would be a shape. Tall, far too tall, and wrong in the joints, the limbs too many or too long. I could never hold it in my eye long enough to count. Wet, it glistened. It moved the way water moves down a pane of glass, without seeming to take a single step, and where it had been the smell of silt and rot came rolling in thick enough to gag on. I never saw a face. I have been grateful for that every single day. Whatever it used to call us, it did not keep on the front of its head, and some mercies are only the absence of a worse thing. Bradley broke a little before dawn. He had been so sure, you see, and certainty like that does not bend, it snaps. He started shouting into the fog. He shouted that it was not real, that he did not believe it, that Vincent had wandered off and we needed to look for him. He picked up a burning branch and held it out and shouted, "Where are you?" And I understood with a cold drop in my stomach that he had done it, that in his fear he had broken the only rule he had answered. He had called out into the fog and asked it where it was. The fog answered him. It answered in his own voice. It said, back to him, perfect, every catch and crack of it. "Where are you?" And Bradley Carpenter went white and silent, because there is nothing left to say when the fog has learned your own voice and is using it to look for you in the gray. And Monica, gentle Monica, who answered everything, who could not let a single call go unheard, took her cousin's hand to comfort him. That was when the voice called her name. It called her in her mother's voice. I know that because she told us, in the half-second she had left, she said, in a small wondering voice, "That is Mama." And her face came open with a joy so pure it was the worst thing I have ever seen on a human face, because I knew what was coming and she did not. Or worse, she did and did not care. "Monica, sweetheart," the fog said. "Monica, I am right here." Crystal had her. I had her. We had learned by then what holding on was worth, which was nothing, but we held on anyway because what else is there? And Monica Long looked at us with that open, joyful face, and she said the thing that I hear every time fog comes up a valley, every time for the rest of my life. She said it would be rude not to answer, and she answered. She called back into the fog, "I am here, Mama," the way she had called back to every bird and every marmot and every voice that had ever reached for her, because that was who she was. Because she could not let a thing that called to her go unanswered, because her kindness was the whole shape of her, and a thing in the fog had watched her at the trailhead and learned that kindness and turned it into a hook. I will not tell you the sound. I have told you everything else. I will not tell you that. There were 4 of us left when the gray began to thin. Crystal, Leon, Phyllis, and me. We did not move and we did not speak. We had stopped trying to make sense of it. We sat in a tight knot with our backs together and we did the only thing that works. The thing Vincent had told me, and the thing Hollis had told me, and the thing someone told Hollis 100 years before. All of them passing one small hard rule down the mountain hand to hand because it is the only thing that has ever worked. Do not answer what calls you by name in the fog. It called for hours. It called in every voice it had collected. It called in Vincent's voice and Monica's voice and Bradley's voice and voices I did not know. Voices from other summers, other groups, other people who had answered. It begged. It wept. At one point it called in the voice of a child. And Phyllis, who could not hear it, watched Crystal's hands shake and put her own small hand over them and held on. We did not answer. We did not answer when it used our mothers, and we did not answer when it used our children, and we did not answer when, near the very end, it used my own dead teacher Hollis one last time, calling me by the name only he ever called me, telling me he was proud of me, telling me to come and rest. There is a thing that happens to you when you sit inside the longest hours of your life refusing to answer the voice of everyone you have ever loved. It is not bravery. I want to be honest about that because people have called me brave and it makes me sick to hear it. It is not bravery. It is something closer to drowning, where you go still not because you are strong but because you have understood at last that thrashing only takes you down faster. Leon Patterson, who had said almost nothing the whole trip, was the steadiest of us, and at the worst of it, when the fog was using Monica's mother's voice to call all 4 of our names in turn, he began to hum. Low, tuneless, a sound with no words in it at all, a sound that could not be mistaken for an answer, and he reached out and took my wrist and Crystal's wrist, and Phyllis took Crystal's other hand, and the 4 of us made a small closed ring of held hands and one wordless hum, and we filled our own ears with a sound that meant nothing so that we would not be tempted to make a sound that meant come and find me. That is how we lived, not by courage, by holding hands and humming nonsense at a thing that wanted us. Until the sky changed. I bit down on my own sleeve until I tasted blood, and I did not answer. And then the sun came up over the heath, real sun, and the fog sank back down into the ground the way it had risen, slow and reluctant, like something being called home, and the smell of river silt thinned and was gone, and the bog was just a bog, brown and quiet and steaming faintly in the new light. The 3 of them and I walked off that mountain without speaking. We did not look for the others. There was nothing to look for. I have been on enough searches to know the difference between a missing person and a taken one, and I knew, the way you know your own name, that the Monongahela had closed over Bradley and Vincent and Monica and would not be giving them back. I wrote it up as 3 lost in fog, presumed drowned in the bog. Crystal and Leon and Phyllis signed it. We never spoke of it again, the 4 of us, though Phyllis sent me a card every Christmas until she died. And the card never said anything but I am glad you did not answer, in a shaking hand, and I knew exactly what she meant. I want to tell you a little about what it does to a person, the after. Crystal Rice moved to the flat middle of the country, to a place with no hills at all, where you can see a storm coming for an hour before it reaches you and nothing can hide in a fold of ground because there are no folds of ground. She wrote me once to say she chose it for the flatness, and she did not have to explain. Leon Patterson I lost track of, which is what Leon would have wanted, a quiet man going quietly. And Phyllis kept her hearing aids in a drawer after that and stopped wearing them, and her family thought it was vanity or stubbornness, an old woman refusing help, and it was not. She had learned on that mountain that there are sounds it is safer not to be able to hear. She had been the only one of us the fog could not reach with a voice, and she had decided to stay that way for the rest of her life. The last card she sent me, the winter before she passed, did not say I am glad you did not answer. It said something else. It said, in that same shaking hand, it has been getting closer to the water. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. I left the service that winter. I told them my knees. It was not my knees. Here is the part I have never told anyone, and the reason I have told you all the rest. It does not stay on the mountain. I live in a town now, in a valley, by a real river, the brown slow kind. And most mornings the fog comes up off the water the way fog does, ordinary fog. And most mornings nothing happens at all. But there are mornings, a few a year, when the fog comes up thicker than it should, and it smells of silt and rot the way no honest river smells. And on those mornings a voice comes off the water and calls my name. It uses Hollis. It uses Vincent. Last spring it used Monica, gentle and warm, asking why I never answered her. And I sat on my own porch with my coffee going cold, and I bit down, and I did not answer. The way I have not answered for all these years, because the rule is the rule, and the rule has kept me alive. But I have to tell you what happened 3 weeks ago, because I think it is why I finally needed to say all of this out loud. The fog came up. It smelled of silt. And the voice that came off the river was not Hollis, and it was not Vincent, and it was not Monica. It was mine. It was my own voice, perfect. Every catch and crack of it coming off the water in the gray. And it was not calling my name. It had stopped calling my name a while ago, I realize now. It had stopped asking me to come. My own voice, out in the fog, was calling the name of the woman who lives in the house next to mine. Gentle, patient. The way you call someone you are sure will come, because the thing in the fog learned the rule too. It listened to all of us holding on to it for all those years, and it understood, the way it understands everything, that silence was the lock on the door. So it stopped needing me to answer. It only needed my voice. It needed to sound like someone you would cross any distance to reach. It does not have to climb down off its mountain and come into my town. It never did. It only had to learn one voice that this town already trusts, and let the river carry that voice up the valley on the wrong kind of fog, and wait, the way it has always waited, with all the time in the world. I have thought about leaving. I think about it every morning the fog comes up. But I have come to understand the truth that Phyllis was trying to tell me in her last card, the one I did not understand until it was too late to ask her what she meant. It has been getting closer to the water. There is always more water. There is always another valley, another slow brown river, another town full of kind people who answer when they are called. Running would only carry my voice somewhere new. I do not answer what calls me by name in the fog. I never will. The rule is the rule, but the rule was always only ever about me. And my neighbor is a kind woman. She answers everything. There is a logbook in my truck with a black cover, and in 30 years on this ridge I have filled 4 of them, and not one entry in any of them is the truth. I write down bear, I write down exposure, I write down that a man stepped wrong on wet shale and the mountain did the rest. Last summer I wrote down that Norma Jenkins, 65 years old, wandered off the marked path in the July heat and was never recovered. That entry is the closest I have ever come to honest, because the only thing I left out is that I watched her go, and I did not move, and the thing that took her had 4 legs and no shadow and a sound in its chest like a heavy door being dragged across stone. I am going to tell you the whole of it now, the way it happened, because I am too old to keep carrying it alone, and because the 6 people who came up here that July deserve to have one true account of them somewhere in the world. My name does not matter much. What matters is that I am the ranger for this district, the long green throat of West Virginia where the ridge line comes down off South Mountain and folds itself into a hollow that the old maps do not bother to name. I have walked every game trail in it. I know where the springs run sweet and where they run bitter with iron. And I knew, the moment Dean Hughes pulled his 2 trucks into my station lot that morning, that I should have turned all 6 of them around and sent them home. I did not. That is the first thing I have to answer for. Dean was 54, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of handshake that is trying to tell you something. He had a folder of printed maps and a permit he had filled out in advance, every line neat. He told me his wife Carol had passed that winter, and that this hollow was where he had asked her to marry him 30 years before, and that he wanted to bring the people who had loved her up to the high meadow to lay her ashes in the place where it all started. He said it plainly, the way a man says a thing he has practiced so it will not break him in front of strangers. 3 nights, he said. We hike in, we camp by the old meadow, we do what we came to do, we hike out. Derek wants to hunt the 2nd morning. That a problem? Season is open, I told him. It is not the hunting I would worry about up there. He smiled like I had made a joke. Behind him the others were climbing out of the trucks. April Sanders was 33, Carol's niece, with a camera around her neck and a way of looking at the tree line like she was already framing it. She shook my hand and held it a half-second too long, and she said, quiet, he has not slept since February. This is good for him. Whatever you are about to tell us, please do not scare him off it. I have thought about that a great deal since. She asked me to lie to them before I had even decided to. Erica Henderson was 47, a nurse who worked the same hospital as Dean, sleeves rolled, sunscreen already on, the only one of them dressed like she had read the weather. She did not believe in much. You could see it in how she counted the water jugs twice. Derek Coleman was 58, Dean's brother-in-law, and he had a rifle case out of the truck bed before his boots were laced. He was a hunter the way some men are hunters, which is to say it was the largest part of how he had decided to be a man, and he did not like the look of me telling him the ground. And then there were the two old ones, and the two old ones are the reason I am telling this at all. Warren Ross was 78. He had been born in this hollow, in a cabin that is now 4 courses of fallen chimney stone, and a depression in the laurel. His people farmed the bottoms until the timber companies bought them out and the road washed away and the families left, one by one, the way families do, until there was nobody left up there but the foundations. Warren had not been back in 60 years. He came that morning because Carol had been his great-niece, and because Norma had asked him, and because there are some things you do not say no to when you are 78. Norma Jenkins was 65, Warren's younger sister, soft-spoken, gray hair pinned up neat, a woman who packed a thermos of sweet tea and offered me a cup of it before I had given her any reason to be kind to me. She took it badly, the climbing. I could see that too. Her ankles were not made for that ground anymore. I should have said it then. I should have said, the old woman is not fit for that trail. Take the meadow off the South Fire Road instead. It is gentler, and it ends at the same place. I did not, because Dean had his neat folder and his practiced sentence and his dead wife in a tin, and because April had asked me with her eyes not to be the man who ruined it. So I did the thing I have spent 30 years regretting. I offered to walk them in myself. The trail up to the old meadow is 4 miles and gains most of its height in the last one. It was hot, the kind of West Virginia July heat that sits in the green like water, and the cicadas were going in the canopy so loud that you had to lean in to talk. Warren walked slow at the back with Norma, and I dropped back with them, and that is how I came to be the one Warren talked to. He talked the way old men talk when they are walking ground that knew them as children. He named things. That spring is the cold spring, he said. That cut is where the wagon road went. And then where the trail bends hard around a shoulder of rock and the canopy closes over so that even at noon it goes to a green gloom. He stopped, and he put his hand on the rock and he was quiet for a while. My father told me a rule about this place, he said, when I was a boy. You want to hear it? I said I did. There is a black dog walks this hollow, Warren said, big as a yearling calf, black as a wet stove. They called it the snarly yow when my father was a boy, and his father called it that before him. It is not a dog. It only wears the shape of one because a dog is the shape a man will not run from until it is too late. He looked at me to see if I was laughing. I was not. My father walked these woods his whole life and saw it 3 times, and the rule he gave me, the rule his father gave him, was this: the mountain does not take the ones who stay. It takes the ones who run. He said it like a prayer he had not said in 60 years and was surprised to find he still knew. You stand still, he said. You do not run, and you do not look it in the eyes, and you let it pass. That is the whole of it. The ones who run, the mountain keeps. Up ahead Derek had heard the tale of it and laughed, the big easy laugh of a man with a rifle. Black dog, he said. Hope he is in season. Warren did not laugh. Norma had gone pale and quiet. The way you go when somebody says out loud the thing you were raised not to say at all. Warren talked a little more after that, low, only to me, while the others walked ahead. He gave me the signs of it the way his father had given them to him. The bugs go quiet before it comes, he said. The whole green wall of them goes out at once, and that is your warning to stand still before you have even seen the thing. It throws no shadow, not at noon, not by firelight, because it is not a thing the light has any hold on. And it does not come for everybody in a party. It comes for the one carrying the most grief, because grief is a hole in a person, and the thing is drawn to a hole in a person the way water is drawn downhill. He looked up the trail at Dean's broad back, at the shape of the tin riding in the top of Dean's pack, and he did not need to say the rest of it out loud. Why did you come then? I asked him. If you knew. Because Norma asked me, he said, and because I am an old man, and I thought maybe 60 years was long enough that it would not know me anymore. He almost smiled. A thing like that does not forget. I should have known better. You do not get old enough to stop being a fool. You only get old enough to see it sooner. I want to tell you that I felt something then, a cold finger down the spine, a warning. I did not. I had walked that hollow 1,000 times and never seen anything I could not name. I thought Warren was an old man homesick for a place that had hurt his family, dressing his grief up in his father's story. I told him it was good country, and we walked on, and I did not think about the black dog again until the light started to go. We made the meadow by late afternoon. It is a beautiful place, I will give Dean that. A high open bowl of grass with the ridge standing up behind it and a view down the hollow that goes blue and then gray and then gone into the folds of the mountains. We set the tents in a loose ring. Erica got a fire going. April moved around the edges with her camera and I watched her stop and lower it and stand looking at something at the tree line on the far side of the meadow where the grass ran up into the laurel. "Is there a dog out here?" she asked. "Light, casual. On the ranger crew, I mean. A working dog." "No," I said. "Why?" "I keep catching something black at the edge of the trees," she said, low. "When I look straight at it, there is nothing there." She laughed at herself. Long day. I looked where she was looking. The laurel was still. The cicadas had stopped, I noticed. On that one side of the meadow, the whole green wall of it gone silent, while behind us the fire ticked, and Erica laughed at something Dean had said. A silence with an edge to it, like a held breath. I told April it was a shadow off the ridge. I believed it. That night Dean took out the tin. We stood in a half circle in the last of the light and he talked about Carol, and he could not finish, and Warren finished it for him with a few plain words, and Norma sang something low under her breath, and Dean walked out into the grass alone and scattered her where the meadow looks down the hollow. It was a good thing. I am glad they did it. I want that on the record too, because of everything that came after. I want it written somewhere that for 1 hour up there it was tender and ordinary and human. Then the light went out of the bowl, and the gloom came up out of the hollow the way it does, and on the far side of the meadow, exactly where April had been looking, something stood up out of the laurel and into the open grass. It was a dog. It was the size of a calf. It was so black that it did not so much stand in the failing light as cut a hole in it. And in that whole open meadow, with the last gray light coming flat across the grass, the thing threw no shadow at all. Derek saw it the same moment I did, and Derek did the thing that is in the blood of men like Derek, which is to reach for the rifle. "Easy," Warren said. He did not raise his voice. He had gone very still, both hands open at his sides. "Easy. Nobody moves quick. Nobody runs." "That is a bear," Erica said, and her voice climbed on the word. "That is a black bear. That is all. Just nobody." "It is not a bear," Warren said. It was not a bear. A bear has heft and roll to it. This stood square and patient on 4 legs and held its head low and level, and the head was wrong, too long, and the eyes when they caught the firelight did not catch it the way an animal's eyes do. They did not flash green or gold. They took the light in and gave nothing back, 2 flat coals, and they were fixed on Dean. Dean had not moved. He was out in the grass alone, 10 yards closer to it than the rest of us, the empty tin still in his hands. "Dean," April said. "Dean, come back to the fire, slow." "Stand still," Warren said, low and even, like he was talking a horse off a ledge. "Dean, do not run from it. Do not look it in the eye. You stand still and you let it pass. The mountain takes the ones who run." For a long moment, nobody breathed. The fire was the only sound. The fire and, far off, a single whippoorwill that had no business calling at that hour. The black dog held its place at the edge of the grass. And then, the way a shadow goes when a cloud slides off the sun, it was simply not there. No turning, no trot back into the laurel. It was there, and then the grass was empty and the cicadas came back on all at once like a switch had been thrown. Dean walked back to the fire on legs that did not work right and sat down hard and did not say anything for a long time. "I want to stop here and say something to you directly, because if your arms are doing what mine were doing right then, if the hair on them is standing up, then you already understand this story better than I did at the time. And if you have been carrying that feeling with me this far and you have not yet tapped the like button on this video, do it now, before the part I have never told anyone, because what happened in the next 18 hours is the part I came up here today to finally say out loud. We did not sleep. Of course we did not sleep. Erica talked herself into the bear theory and out of it a dozen times. Derek sat up with the rifle across his knees, and I let him, because a man like Derek needs the weight of it to keep his hands from shaking, and because I still half believed even then that the worst thing in those woods was a frightened man with a gun. Warren and Norma sat close together and did not say much. Once, near the bottom of the night, I heard Norma whisper to him, "It looked at Dean, Warren, it looked at Dean," and I heard Warren say back, "It looks at the one carrying grief. It always has. It is drawn to a hole in a person. We get him out of here at first light, and it ends." The night was long in a way that nights are not supposed to be. I have spent more nights in the open than in any bed, and I know the shape of them, the way the cold settles and the stars wheel and the small things move in the grass. This was not that. The cicadas would run for an hour and then go out altogether, that rolling wall of silence coming in across the meadow, and every one of us would go rigid and stare at the black line of the laurel, and nothing would come, and after a while the bugs would start again and we would breathe. It happened 4 times before dawn. It was a thing being patient with us. It was a thing letting us learn what its silence meant, teaching us the way you teach a dog to flinch before you have ever once raised your hand. Around 3 in the morning, April came and sat down beside me. She had her camera in her lap, but she was not taking pictures. "I got one of it," she said. "When it stood up in the meadow, I checked just now." She turned the screen to me. There was the meadow in the last gray light, the grass, the laurel, the dark line of the trees. There was no dog in the photograph. There was only where it had stood, a place where the picture seemed to go thin, a smear of nothing, like a spot the film had refused to take. "It was right there," she said, very quietly. "I was looking straight at it. Why is it not there?" I did not have an answer for her. I have one now. The light had no hold on it, and neither did the lens. It is not a thing that leaves a mark on anything in this world, except on the people it lets live. At first light we broke camp fast and started down. The trail down the hollow is the same trail you walk up, 4 miles. I have walked it more times than I have walked the road to my own front door. I took the lead. Dean and April behind me, then Erica, then Derek, and Warren and Norma at the back where they could set their own pace. We were quiet and quick, and the morning was bright and ordinary, and I let myself believe we had imagined a bear and a trick of failing light, the way you do when the sun is up. We came to the hard bend around the shoulder of rock, the place where Warren had told me the rule. And the trail past it was wrong. I do not have a clean way to say this. The trail went down, the way it should, and the canopy closed over, the way it should, and we walked it. And after 20 minutes we came around a shoulder of rock to a hard bend in the trail, and it was the same bend, the same shoulder of rock. Warren's handprint, where he had touched the moss the day before, still pressed into the green of it. "We turned around," Erica said. "We got turned around, that is all." We did not turn around," I said. I had been at the front. I knew the ground. We had walked downhill the entire way, and we had arrived above where we started. There is no telling you how that feels until it happens to you. It is not fear at first. It is your mind refusing, plainly, the way a key refuses a lock it does not fit. We tried it again. I watched the compass the whole way, watched it hold steady south and down, and we walked 40 minutes down a falling grade with the water running downhill beside us the right direction, and we came around the shoulder of rock to the hard bend in the trail, and it was the same bend. That was when I heard the cicadas stop. They went out the way they had gone out in the meadow, a wall of silence rolling toward us through the green, and Derek brought the rifle up, and out of the laurel below the bend, in the middle of the trail, standing square across our only way down, was the black dog. It was bigger in the daylight, which should not be possible, because daylight is supposed to make things smaller and plainer. It did not. The light fell on it and went nowhere. It stood in the trail and lowered its long head, and from somewhere down in its chest came the sound, the one I have spent 20 years failing to forget, low and grinding. A heavy door dragged slow across stone, and it was looking at Dean. "Do not run," Warren said from the back, urgent now. "Anybody, listen to me. Stand still." "It is between us and out," Derek said. His voice was high and tight. "It is between us and the trucks, Warren. I am not standing here while that thing—" "Derek," I said. "Do not." He fired. I have seen a lot of men shoot a lot of game. Derek was a good shot, and it was 30 feet, and he did not miss. The rifle went off enormous in that closed green tunnel of trail, and I saw the round take the thing square in the chest, and nothing happened. No stagger, no spray, no sound of meat. The black dog did not so much as flinch. It stood and looked at us out of its 2 flat coal eyes, and the round had gone into it the way a stone goes into a pond, and closed over and was gone. Derek made a sound I have never heard a grown man make. He worked the bolt and fired again, and it was the same, the great flat crack, and then nothing, the dog standing patient in the trail. And on the third shot the firing pin fell on an empty chamber and clicked, and in the silence after the click the black dog took 1 step toward us, and Derek ran. He went off the trail, up the slope to the right, crashing through the laurel, the rifle thrown down behind him, and I heard Warren shout the rule one last time: "Do not run, the mountain takes the ones who run." And I heard Derek crashing up through the green, and then I heard the black dog go after him, and the sound it made going was the worst part, because it made no sound at all. One moment it was in the trail in front of us. The next the laurel where Derek had gone in was thrashing, far up the slope. much farther up than a thing could have run in that half second, and Derek was screaming, and then the Laurel was still, and then Derek was not screaming anymore. We never found him. I want to be honest about that. We did not find a body, or blood, or the rifle when we went back for it. We found nothing. The way you find nothing. The way the logbook in my truck says again and again that we found nothing. Derek Coleman, 58, separated from his party in steep terrain and was not recovered. That is what it says. That is a lie shaped exactly like the truth, which is the only kind of lie I know how to tell anymore. The five of us stood in the trail in a silence that the cicadas did not come back to fill. And then, far down the hollow, faint, drifting up through the trees the way smoke does, we heard the cicadas start up again below the bend, and I understood that the way down was open now, that the dog had what it had come up the slope to take, and it had let us see the rule proven, and it had stepped aside. Warren was the one who said it, in a voice gone old and flat. It does not want us to leave, he said. It wants us to run. We got down the bend that afternoon. The trail led us. We came around the shoulder of rock, and it gave way to new ground, the way it should have all along, and I have wondered ever since whether the trail had ever truly been a circle, or whether the dog simply did not let your feet carry you past until it was finished, the way a hand holds a door. But we did not get out. We got down perhaps a mile of that lower trail, the five of us moving like one frightened animal, before the light started to fail and Norma's ankle gave out under her on the wet stone and she went down with a cry that I still hear. She could not walk. The ankle swelled up over the top of her boot. Erica, who was a nurse and who had spent the whole day holding the rational world together with her bare hands, knelt over it and wrapped it and said we could splint it and carry her between us, and we both knew, looking at each other over the old woman's head, that we were not going to make the trucks before the gloom came up out of the hollow. So we did the only thing there was to do. We stopped on a flat shelf of ground beside the trail and we made no fire, because Warren said no fire, and we put Norma in the middle, and we waited for the light to go, and we waited for the dog. Waiting for a thing you know is coming is its own particular cruelty. We sat in the gloom on that shelf of rock, and nobody spoke above a whisper. Norma was in pain and trying not to show it, her hand tight in Warren's, and Warren talked to her the whole time in a low, steady voice. Not about the dog, about home, about people 60 years dead. He named the families that had farmed the bottoms. He told her about a girl named Effie who had drowned in the cold spring when they were children, and about their mother's biscuits, and the smell of curing tobacco hanging in the loft. He was giving her the only thing he had left to give, which was somewhere else to be. I have thought about that more than almost anything. An old man holding his sister in the worst night of her life and walking her, with nothing but words, back into a sunlit kitchen that had been gone for 60 years. Dean sat with his back against the rock and his eyes open, and he said once, to no one, "It came because of me." Nobody answered him because it was true, and there was no kindness left in saying so. April put her arm through his and held on. Erica checked Norma's ankle by feel, because we had no light, and her hands were shaking, and she pressed them flat against her own knees to make them stop, and she said low, "The way a person says a thing to keep from screaming, there is an explanation for all of this. There is. I just have not thought of it yet." She held on to that sentence like a rail in a stairwell. I did not take it from her. Sometimes the lie is the only thing holding a person upright, and you let them keep it, the way I would spend the next 20 years letting myself keep mine. It came in the last gray minute, the way it had come in the meadow, standing up out of the laurel on the downhill side of us, between us and out, and this time it did not stand far off. It came up the trail toward us, slow and patient, and put itself down in the path 20 feet below us, and lowered its long head and made the sound in its chest. The door dragged across stone, and it looked at us, and it waited. "Nobody moves," Warren said. His voice was steady now. He had spent his whole life knowing this would find him, I think, and now that it had, a kind of calm had come into him. "This is the part my father told me. It will come close. It will want you to run. You stand still. You do not look it in the eyes. You let it pass. The mountain does not take the ones who stay. It takes the ones who run." There it was again. The same words. I had heard them on the way up as an old man's homesick story, and I heard them now as the only thing in the world that was keeping us alive. The dog came closer. I have no language for what it is to stand still while that thing walks toward you. Every part of a body that has kept your kind alive for 100,000 years is screaming at you to move, to run, to put a tree between you and it, and you have to stand, and you have to look at the ground, and you have to let the screaming run through you and out the soles of your feet into the rock. It came up the last of the trail, and it walked in among us. I felt the cold come off it. There is no warmth in it at all. That is the thing nobody tells you. It is a hole in the warm world, and the cold of it poured over my hands, and I looked at the dirt, and I did not move, and I heard it breathing, and the breath of it smelled like the cold spring tastes, like iron, like the inside of the mountain. April was shaking. I could hear her teeth. But she stood. Dean stood, white and silent, and finally terribly awake. Erica stood with her hand fisted in the back of Norma's collar to hold her, to keep her still. And the dog went to Norma. It put its long head down level with the old woman's face. She was on the ground with her ruined ankle out in front of her, and she could not have run if every law of the world had ordered her to. And so I have told myself, for 20 years, that what happened was not her breaking the rule. I have told myself that. I do not believe it. The truth is that when that cold long head came down level with her eyes, Norma Jenkins looked at it. She looked it in the eyes, which Warren had told us not to do. And then she did the thing the body does, the thing none of us can swear we would not have done. She scrambled back. She put her hands behind her and pushed herself away from it. 1 foot of frightened ground, the smallest motion a person can make. She moved. Norma, Warren said, just her name. He did not move either. That is the thing I have to tell you, the thing that is the rotten black core of this whole account. Her own brother stood still and said her name and did not move, because to move was to die, and so did I, and so did all of us. We stood in a ring around the oldest and gentlest of us, and we watched the cold come down over her, and we did not move, because the rule that was keeping us alive was the rule that required us to do nothing while it took her. She did not scream. That is the small mercy, if it is one. She made a sound like a question, soft, surprised, and then the shelf of ground was empty where she had been, and the dog was gone with her. No turning, no sound, there and then not, and the cold went out of the air, and a long way off down the hollow the cicadas began, 1 and then 100, filling up the silence she had left. Warren made no sound at all. He stood in the place where his sister had been, and he looked at the empty ground, and after a while he said, very quietly, not to any of us, "It takes the ones who run." And then he said, quieter still, "It does not take the ones who stay. It keeps them." I did not understand him then. I understand him now. We walked out. The trail led us. We reached the trucks a little after midnight, and I drove them down to my station, and I sat with them until the sun came up, and then I wrote the first of the lies, 2 of them, Derek and Norma, separated and lost in steep terrain, never recovered. Erica signed where I told her to sign. Dean could not hold the pen. April held his hand. Warren read the page I had written, the whole careful false page of it, and he handed it back to me, and he said, "You knew it was here. It was not a question. You have always known it was here, and you stay." I told him I had never seen it before that week. That was true. I have not told him, because I have not seen him since, that I have seen it many times since, because here is the part I came up here today to finally say. Warren and Dean and April and Erica went home. They got in their trucks and they drove down off this mountain and out of this hollow, and the dog let them go, because they had learned the rule, and the rule had marked them as the ones who stay still, and a thing that takes the ones who run has no use for the ones who have learned not to. But I did not go home. I am the ranger for this district. I have been the ranger for this district for 30 years, and in all that time I have put in for transfer 6 times, and 6 times the paper has been lost or denied or come back unsigned, and the truth I have stopped pretending not to know is that I am not going to leave this mountain. Every spring I tell myself this is the year. Every spring something keeps me. The mountain does not take the ones who stay, it takes the ones who run, and I learned that July 20 years ago, standing in a ring around an old woman while the cold came down on her, that I am not going to run. I learned it too well, so I stay. I walk the trails. I keep the logbook with the black cover. And at dusk, more evenings than not, when the gloom comes up out of the hollow and the cicadas go out along one wall of green, I see it standing at the edge of the tree line where the grass runs up into the laurel, black as a wet stove, throwing no shadow, patient, its 2 flat coal eyes fixed on the one human being left up here who is carrying a hole in him the size of a thing he watched and did not stop. It is not waiting to take me. I understand that now. I am the ones who stay. It is waiting to see if I will ever, even once, decide to run. 6 pairs of boots went up Bell Hollow Trail on the 2nd Saturday of July, and only 4 pairs came back down the mountain with feet still inside them. I keep the printout from the radio log in my desk drawer. the one with the timestamp 6:47 in the evening, because the dispatcher who took that call started her notes in steady block letters and ended them in a scrawl I have never managed to read past the third word. I will not give you my name. It does not matter as much as what I carry to work every day, which is the weight of knowing exactly what waited for 6 ordinary people in the laurel thickets above the old Coomer family cemetery, and the one piece of wisdom an old man tried to give them before any of it began. Louis Perry was 69 years old, and had spent 40 of those years pulling coal out of the mountain before his knees gave out and his lungs went thin. He grew up 2 ridges over from Bell Hollow, in a house with no running water, and a grandmother who told him the old stories before bed instead of prayers. He was the one who organized the trip, though he would have told you it was Valerie Griffin who pushed for it, since the cemetery they were hiking toward held 3 generations of her family, and she had been wanting to walk that ground since her mother passed the year before. Valerie was 60, a retired schoolteacher with a spine like a fence post and a voice that could quiet a classroom of 30 children without ever rising above a whisper. She brought a notebook and a folding trowel, intending to clean the headstones and press the family names into paper the way she had done as a girl. Tina Alexander, 44, came along because Valerie was her aunt by marriage and because Tina had not taken a vacation in 3 years. Tina worked 2 jobs and rarely slept enough, and she told her sister on the phone the night before that she just wanted 4 days where nobody needed anything from her. Jerome Russell was 56, a contractor with a bad back and a good sense of humor, the kind of man who made every group feel lighter just by being in it. He and Louis had known each other since high school, and it was Jerome who packed the fishing rods, certain they would find a creek worth working before the weekend was through. Cody Hayes, 35, was the youngest of the group and the only one who had never set foot in those particular mountains. He brought a camera with a long lens and a head full of videos he had watched online about Appalachian cryptids, and he made no secret of the fact that part of why he came was to catch something on film that nobody would believe otherwise. And then there was Mildred Butler, 75, Louis Perry's older sister, sharp as broken glass and twice as likely to cut you if you underestimated her. She insisted on coming despite a hip that had been replaced twice and a doctor's note nobody in the group had actually read. She said she had buried enough people from her porch chair and she intended to walk into these mountains on her own legs while she still had legs worth walking on. They parked 2 trucks at the trailhead a little after 9 in the morning, the gravel lot empty except for a faded sign warning hikers to stay on marked paths after dusk, the kind of sign most visitors photograph and forget. The plan was simple. 3 days in, following Bell Hollow Creek up through a stand of old-growth poplar to the cemetery clearing, then 2 days working their way back down with whatever blackberries and trout they could gather along the way. Nothing about the morning suggested anything was wrong. The air smelled like wet stone and honeysuckle, and Jerome whistled an old hymn under his breath the whole first mile. The trail register at the head of the path told its own quiet story to anyone who bothered to read it closely. 4 names had signed in over the previous 2 weeks, and only 3 of those 4 had ever signed back out. A note beside the 4th entry, written in pencil and partly smudged by weather, said only that the hiker had been located safe near the county road 11 miles from where his vehicle was parked, and that he had declined to discuss what had caused him to leave the trail. Cody read the note out loud, half joking, and asked whether anyone wanted to guess what story that hiker was not telling. Valerie told him to close the register and get moving, in a tone that ended the conversation before it could really start. The first 2 hours of the climb passed easily enough. The trail wide and well kept, the creek running loud and clear beside them, full of the kind of cold mountain water that makes a person forget for a little while that there is any reason to hurry. Mildred set her own pace near the back of the line, refusing every offer to slow down for her, telling Tina more than once that she had walked steeper ground than this before any of the rest of them were born. Tina laughed at that, a real laugh, the first easy sound of the whole trip, and for an hour or so the 6 of them moved through the green light under the poplar canopy like any other group of friends out for a long walk in good country, nothing more and nothing less. It was Louis who first mentioned the word that would matter most before the day was through. They had stopped to eat lunch on a flat outcrop above the creek, and Cody was telling a story he had read online about something the old-timers in these hills used to call a yahoo. A tall creature covered in hair that walked on 2 legs and screamed in the night like a woman in mourning. Cody laughed while he told it. The way people laugh at things they want to believe are only stories. Louis did not laugh. He set down his sandwich and looked out at the tree line for a long moment before he spoke. "I want you to know something before we go any further," he said. My grandmother used to say the mountain only takes what calls attention to itself. Stay quiet, stay slow, and it will let you pass. Make noise, make a show, and it will notice you. That is not folklore to me. That is the only rule I have ever needed up here." Tina laughed it off, calling it a campfire warning meant to keep children from wandering. Valerie said nothing, only nodded the way a person nods when they already believe something but do not want to admit how much. Cody filmed the whole exchange on his camera, grinning at the lens afterward, telling his future audience that Grandpa here was setting the mood early. If you have not liked this video yet, take a second and do it now, because the next few hours are the reason none of these 6 people ever looked at these mountains the same way again, assuming they got the chance to look at anything again at all. By late afternoon, they reached the first camp, a clearing above the creek where Jerome had stayed once before on a hunting trip years earlier. They set up 2 tents and a cook fire, and Jerome managed to pull 2 decent trout from a deep pool before the light started to fail. Dinner was easy and warm, the kind of evening that makes people forget why anyone would ever warn them about anything at all. The first sound came a little after 10 that night. It started low, almost like wind moving through a hollow tree, and then it rose into something with shape to it. A long, rolling cry that climbed and climbed until it broke at the top into something close to a scream. It did not sound like any owl Jerome had ever heard, and he had heard plenty. It did not sound like a bobcat, which Tina insisted it must be, her voice a half octave higher than usual as she said it. It lasted nearly 30 seconds and then stopped clean, the way a recording stops when someone presses a button. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Mildred was the one who finally broke the quiet, saying only, "Well, that is new," in a tone so flat that Cody actually laughed. A short, nervous bark of a sound that he seemed to regret the moment it left him. Lewis did not laugh. He stood from his camp chair and walked to the edge of the firelight, listening, his head turned slightly the way a man turns his head when he is trying to judge distance and direction at once. When he came back, he told them to bank the fire low and keep their voices down for the rest of the night. Nobody argued. Even Tina, who an hour earlier had been ready to dismiss the whole thing as a bobcat, found herself speaking in something close to a whisper as she zipped her tent shut. Cody could not let it go. He sat up with his camera pointed toward the tree line for nearly an hour after the others had gone quiet, certain that whatever had made that sound would show itself if he waited long enough. Around midnight he saw movement, a tall shape passing between 2 trunks at the far edge of where his lens could reach, there and gone in under 2 seconds, too brief and too distant for the footage to ever prove anything to anyone who had not been standing in those woods that night. He woke Jerome in a whisper to tell him, and the 2 men sat together at the dead fire for the rest of the night, neither of them sleeping, neither of them saying very much at all. In the morning, Mildred's food bag was gone from where it had been hung between 2 trees, the rope cut clean rather than chewed, and a set of tracks pressed deep into the soft mud along the creek bank led away from camp and up into the laurel. Louis crouched over one print for a long time, measuring it with his own boot beside it for scale, his face giving away nothing of what he was thinking. Valerie asked him what he saw. He stood up slowly, brushed the dirt from his palms, and said only that they should pack up and move on toward the cemetery while the morning light was still good, that there was no use standing around a print in the mud arguing about what made it. It was the closest thing to a lie any of them ever heard him tell, and not one of them caught it at the time. They broke camp a little after 8 and started up the trail in a silence that none of the usual conversation could quite fill, each of them privately replaying that long rising cry from the night before, each of them privately deciding not to be the one who said out loud what they were thinking. The trail narrowed as it climbed, the poplar giving way to thick stands of mountain laurel that pressed in close on both sides, and twice that morning Cody stopped walking entirely, certain he had heard something moving parallel to them through the brush, only a few yards off the path, keeping pace. Nobody else heard it. Or if they did, nobody said so. By mid-morning, the trail leveled out into a long shaded bench, and it was there, just past a fallen chestnut log gone soft with rot, that Jerome stopped walking and raised one hand for quiet. Ahead of them, scattered across the path like something deliberately arranged, lay the remains of a deer, the carcass split open and arranged with its legs bent back in a way no predator anyone in that group had ever heard of would leave it. Mildred was the first to speak, and what she said was simple enough that none of them forgot it afterward. "That was not left there by accident," she said. "Somebody wanted us to see it." The last thing that happened before they reached the cemetery clearing that afternoon was the sound again, The same long climbing cry, except this time it came from somewhere much closer than the night before, and this time, before it had even finished, a second cry answered it from a different direction entirely, and then both of them stopped at exactly the same moment, as if whatever had made them had just heard something worth going quiet for. They reached the cemetery clearing a little after 2 in the afternoon, a half-acre of open ground ringed by old fieldstone walls and shaded by a single massive white oak that Valerie said her great-grandfather had planted with his own hands. 11 headstones stood inside the low wall, most of them worn smooth by weather, a few still legible enough to read names that matched names in Valerie's family Bible at home. She knelt at the largest stone, the one marking her great-grandmother, and began clearing moss from the carved letters with the trowel she had carried for exactly this purpose, and for a while, surrounded by sun and old stone and the steady hum of insects, the morning's fear seemed almost foolish. It was Jerome who suggested they make camp inside the cemetery wall rather than in the tree line beyond it, reasoning out loud that whatever had been pacing them through the laurel might think twice about crossing onto ground marked with stone and iron. Louis agreed without much discussion, which told the others more than his words did. They set the tents close together near the oak, and Jerome built the fire smaller than usual, more out of habit now than comfort. This is where I should tell you something I only learned much later, when I sat with Tina in a hospital room 2 states away and asked her to walk me through every hour of those 3 days while her memory was still sharp enough to trust. She told me the group had 2 arguments that afternoon, and that both of them were really about the same thing, even though nobody said so at the time. The first argument was between Jerome and Tina, and on the surface it was about whether to turn back the next morning instead of pushing on toward the second creek crossing as planned. Jerome said his gut was telling him something he had not felt in those mountains in 30 years of hunting them, and that his gut had never once been wrong. Tina said they had driven 4 hours and taken 3 days off work neither of them could afford to lose, and that one strange noise and a dead deer were not worth scrapping the whole trip over. What she did not say, what Tina told me later she had been too proud to say out loud at the time, was that she was terrified, and that turning back felt like admitting it, and admitting it felt worse somehow than staying. The second argument was between Louis and Cody, and on the surface it was about Cody's camera flash. Cody wanted to set up a motion light at the tree line that night, rigged to trigger his camera the moment anything crossed it, certain it was his one real chance to capture proof of whatever they had been hearing. Louis told him no. Flatly, the closest thing to anger any of them had heard from him on the whole trip. He said a flash of light in those woods at night was the loudest thing a person could do without making a sound, that it was exactly the kind of attention his grandmother had warned him about his entire life. Cody argued that a story without proof was just a story, and that he had not driven 4 hours to go home with nothing but a sore back and a campfire tale nobody online would believe. In the end, Louis won the argument the way men like him usually do, not by raising his voice but by simply refusing to move from where he was standing until Cody put the equipment away. But Tina told me Cody did not put it away entirely. He packed the trigger light back into his bag, but he kept the camera itself charged and within reach all night, telling himself he was only being careful, not defiant. Supper that evening was quiet in a way meals are not supposed to be among people who like each other. Mildred ate little, complaining for the first time of the climb catching up with her hip, and Valerie sat close beside her, the two of them talking low about family names and old photographs while the men kept half an eye on the tree line. Around 9, full night settled over the clearing, the kind of close mountain night where the stars come out thick but the ground below stays close to lightless, and the fire became the only thing any of them really wanted to look at. It was Jerome who walked off from the fire a little before 10, telling Tina he needed to relieve himself and would only be a minute, that he was not going farther than the edge of the cemetery wall where the old stones gave way to brush. Nobody thought much of it. He had done the same thing the night before without incident, and the wall was barely 30 feet from where they sat. A minute passed, and then 2, and Tina noticed before anyone else that the easy rhythm of his footsteps moving away through the leaves had gone quiet sooner than it should have, as if he had simply stopped walking rather than reached wherever he meant to go. She called his name once, not loud, more out of habit than worry. There was no answer. She called again, louder this time, and Louis was already on his feet before the second call finished leaving her mouth. What happened next took less than a minute by every account I was ever given, though every person who survived it told me it felt much longer. A sound broke from the brush beyond the wall, not the long mournful cry they had heard before but something shorter and sharper, closer to a bark crossed with a scream. cut off almost as soon as it started, the way a sound stops when something large moves quickly through close brush rather than calling out across open space. Then nothing, no second cry, no answer when Louis shouted Jerome's name into the night with a voice that cracked halfway through it. The first time any of them had heard him raise his voice the entire trip. They did not sleep again that night. Cody wanted to search immediately, his camera already in hand, but Louis grabbed his wrist hard enough to leave a mark and told him, low and even, that searching a hollow at night for whatever had just taken a grown man without a sound was the single fastest way to make sure two of them went missing instead of one. Valerie held Mildred, who had gone very still and very quiet in a way that frightened Tina more than the scream had. They built the fire as high as they dared and sat in a tight circle facing outward, and they waited for a light they were no longer certain would come at all. It came, eventually, gray and reluctant through the oak branches, and with it came the thing none of them wanted to be the one to find. At the edge of the cemetery wall, exactly where Jerome's footsteps had stopped sounding the night before, his right boot sat upright in the leaf litter, laces still tied in the double knot he always used. The boot itself, undamaged, empty, set down with a care that nothing driven purely by hunger would have bothered to show. There was no blood. There was no other sign of him at all, not a scrap of clothing, not a single broken branch beyond that point to suggest which direction anything had gone. Valerie was the one who said what the rest of them were thinking and could not make themselves say. It left it there on purpose, she said. It wanted us to find it sitting just like that. Louis knelt beside the boot for a long time without touching it. When he finally stood, his face had the look of a man doing arithmetic he very badly did not want to finish. He told them they were leaving the cemetery within the hour, that they were taking the fastest route down off the mountain regardless of what gear they had to abandon to do it, and that from this point forward nobody, under any circumstance, was to make a sound louder than absolutely necessary. Cody asked the question none of the others wanted to ask out loud. He asked Louis if his grandmother's old rule, the one about staying quiet and staying small, was actually going to be enough to get the rest of them out alive. Louis did not answer him. He only looked toward the tree line where Jerome's boot still sat in the leaves, and then he turned and began breaking down what was left of the camp with hands that for the first time on the whole trip were not entirely steady. They left the cemetery a little after 7 in the morning, 5 people where there had been 6 the day before, moving in a tight, single line down a trail that suddenly felt much longer than it had on the way up. Louis led, setting a pace slow enough to keep Mildred from falling behind but fast enough to put distance between them and the clearing before whatever had taken Jerome decided it was hungry again. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Even Cody, who had filmed nearly every hour of the trip up to that point, kept his camera packed away, the lesson of the flash argument finally landing somewhere it could not be argued away from. It was Mildred's hip that became the real danger before anything else did. By mid-morning her steps had slowed to something closer to a shuffle, and the pain showed plainly on her face even though she refused, twice, to let anyone carry her pack. Around 11, descending a steep switchback above the second creek crossing, her hip gave out entirely, and she went down hard against a root, biting back a cry that still escaped loud enough to carry into the trees around them. For a long moment nobody moved. They simply waited, listening, certain the sound would bring something crashing through the brush toward them. Nothing came, not yet, but Louis's face told Tina everything she needed to know about how much longer that luck might hold. They carried her after that, Valerie and Tina taking turns supporting her weight on one side while Cody braced the other, and the pace that had felt slow before became something closer to a crawl. It was somewhere in that hour, exhausted and frightened and moving far too slowly through country that had already taken one of them, that the wisdom Louis had offered on the first afternoon stopped sounding like an old man's superstition and started sounding like the only thing standing between the 5 of them and whatever waited in the laurel. He said it again, almost word for word, somewhere around noon, his voice barely above breath as they picked their way along a narrow shelf of trail above the creek. "The mountain only takes what calls attention to itself," he whispered. "Stay quiet, stay slow. It will let you pass." It was Cody who broke first, not out of recklessness but out of simple desperation. Mildred had begun to slip in and out of a kind of half-consciousness from the pain and the heat, her breath coming in short, ragged pulls that none of them could quiet no matter how gently they shifted her weight between them, and somewhere past 1 in the afternoon Cody made the decision that would shape everything that came after. He pulled the camera from his bag, not to film, but because its small screen doubled as the only working light source he had left after his headlamp battery had died the night before. and he used it for less than 10 seconds to check the trail map he had saved to its memory, trying to find a faster route down to the ranger station marked at the base of the mountain. 10 seconds was enough. The cry came almost immediately, the same long climbing call from 2 nights before, except now it came from directly above them on the ridge, close enough that every one of them felt it in their chest before they heard it in their ears. A second cry answered from somewhere below the trail, cutting off their retreat in both directions at once, and Louis, for the first time since any of them had known him, said a word out loud that none of them had ever heard him use. What happened over the next several minutes is something I have had to piece together from 4 separate accounts that do not entirely agree with each other, the way memory rarely agrees with itself once enough fear has passed through it. What all 4 accounts agree on is this: Louis made a choice in that moment, and it was a choice born directly out of the same wisdom he had been repeating the entire trip. The very thing that was supposed to keep all of them alive. He told Tina and Valerie to take Cody and move, quietly and quickly, down the steepest line they could find toward the creek, and to keep moving no matter what they heard behind them. He stayed behind with Mildred, whose ragged breathing could not be quieted, who could not be carried fast enough to outrun whatever was already closing on the ridge above. He told his sister he was not leaving her. He told the others that the only way any of them made it down off that mountain was if the thing above them had something closer and slower to notice first. Valerie told me she screamed his name once before Tina clamped a hand over her mouth and pulled her down the slope, and that the last thing she ever heard from that part of the ridge was not a scream at all but Louis's voice, low and steady, saying something to his sister that none of them were close enough to make out, followed by silence so complete it felt like the whole mountain had simply stopped breathing along with them. 3 survivors reached the ranger station a little before dusk, exhausted, scraped from the descent, Cody half carrying Tina by the time they staggered onto the gravel lot. It was my radio that took the call, and it was me who drove the access road up as far as a vehicle could go and walked the rest of the way in with 2 other officers and a flashlight bright enough to make every shadow in those woods look like something it was not. I will admit to you now that I did not believe Tina the first time she told me what had happened on that ridge. I have walked these mountains for over 20 years, and I have heard every version of every story a frightened person can tell after a bad night in the woods. I wrote down her account the way I write down all of them, careful and even, while privately wondering how much of it would change once shock wore off and a calmer memory took its place. It did not change. 3 days later, alone in a different room, Valerie gave me the same account almost word for word, down to the exact phrase Louis had used about the mountain only taking what calls attention to itself, and that is when I stopped wondering and started searching in earnest. We worked that ridge for the better part of 3 weeks, dogs and volunteers and 2 separate search teams brought in from neighboring counties, covering ground that should have produced something more than a single torn strip of fabric 40 yards past the last readable print. We found old deer stands and a collapsed trapper's cabin nobody had logged on any map. We found the bones of animals stacked in ways that made more than one experienced tracker go quiet and refuse to discuss it further. We did not find Louis Perry, and somewhere around the 2nd week, working alone along a game trail well past where any of the other teams were searching, I heard a sound I have never reported in any official capacity, a long rolling cry that rose and broke and stopped clean, the way a recording stops when someone presses a button. And I will tell you plainly that I did not go looking for what made it. I walked back to my truck at a pace just fast enough to call quiet, and I drove the access road down off that mountain without once looking in my mirror. We found Mildred Butler first, a little past the switchback where her hip had given out, unharmed in any way a body can be harmed, but unable to speak a coherent sentence for nearly 2 days afterward, repeating only that she had told him to leave her, that she had told him over and over, and that he would not listen. We never found Louis Perry. We found his boot prints leading up the slope toward the ridge, and we found a single torn strip of his jacket caught on a laurel branch 40 yards beyond where the prints stopped being readable in the leaf litter. And we found nothing else at all. Not that day, not in the 3 weeks of searching that followed, not ever. I think about that old rule of his more than I probably should. The mountain only takes what calls attention to itself. Stay quiet, stay slow, and it will let you pass. It is a good rule. It might even be a true one. But I have come to understand something about it that Louis Perry, for all his years on that mountain, never said out loud to the people who needed to hear it most. Sometimes the only way to keep 5 people quiet enough to survive is for one person to make all the noise instead, and to make sure they are the only one left standing close enough for the mountain to notice when it finally does. If you have made it this far, I would ask you to do one thing before you go. Do not whistle on a quiet trail after dusk in country you do not know well. And if you ever hear something, answer a call that should have had no reason to answer at all. Do not wait to find out which one of you it noticed first. 6 pairs of boots went up that mountain. I keep one of them in an evidence locker that nobody has ever come to claim. Laces still tied in a double knot, exactly the way it was left. I have worked the high trails of these Appalachian forests for almost 30 years, and in all that time I kept one habit the younger rangers used to laugh at. I carried a small recorder on my belt. I used it to catch birdsong, the calls of animals I could not name, the wind moving through a stand of hemlock at the right hour of the morning. I have hours of the mountains saved on those little chips. Most of it is beautiful. There is one file I have never played past the 90-second mark, and tonight I am going to tell you why. My grandfather raised me at the foot of these woods, and he gave me one rule before he gave me anything else worth keeping. He said the forest will give you back any sound you give it. He said it as a kindness and a warning in the same breath. If you laugh in the hollows laugh. If you call a name across the ridge calls it back to you. So be careful, he told me, what you teach the trees to say. I thought he was only an old man being gentle with his words. I know better now. I want to tell you about 6 people. I met them on a Friday in the last week of June at the trailhead below Calder Gap, and within 4 days I would be carrying out everything that was left of them in a single pack. They came up as a group, the way they had every summer for 11 years. They called themselves a walking club, though by then most of them walked slower than they wanted to admit. Randall Simmons led them. He was 72 years old, broad through the shoulders even at that age, with hands like the roots of a tree. He had been coming to this mountain since before I wore the uniform, and he shook my hand as if he were doing me a favor. I liked him anyway. You could not help it. Behind him came Audrey Hughes, 68, small and quick-eyed, with a way of looking at the tree line that I recognized before I understood it. She was looking the way my grandfather used to look, as if the woods owed her money and might try to skip out before paying. The others I learned across that first hour. Naomi Ward was 42, a hospice nurse from down in the valley, calm in the way that people get when they have sat with the dying for a living. Eugene Fisher was 64, a widower, soft-spoken, with a wedding ring still on his hand and a habit of trailing a step behind the rest as if he were waiting for someone to catch up to him. Beth Cooper was the youngest at 37 and the most nervous, and she had brought twice the gear she needed, because nervous people always do. And Calvin Price, 53, loud and grinning, already telling me a story I had not asked for, already deciding that nothing on this mountain could frighten a man like him. I gave them the talk I give everyone. Stay on the marked trail. Hang your food at night. Filter your water. Do not feed anything, not even the friendly-looking ones. They nodded along the way people nod when they have heard it all before. Then I told them the other thing. I do not tell everyone the other thing, but Audrey was watching the trees, and Randall was old enough to have heard it, so I said it plainly. I told them that if they heard singing after sundown, they were to ignore it. Calvin laughed. He asked whether we kept a choir up here. I did not laugh back. I told them that the old families who used to farm these hollows had a name for a thing that lived in the deep timber. They called it the woodland crooner. I told them the stories were probably nothing. I told them that sound carries strangely in these valleys, that a fox can sound like a weeping child, that wind through a split trunk can sound like a hymn at the bottom of a well. And I told them that whatever the cause, the rule was the same one my grandfather had given me. If the woods sing to you, you do not sing back. You do not answer. You keep your teeth together and you walk toward running water, because water has a voice of its own, and it drowns the other one out. Randall said he had been coming up here for 50 years and never heard a thing. Audrey did not say a word. She just kept her eyes on the trees while the others loaded up and bickered over who was carrying the heavy pack. Audrey came over to me by the kiosk, quiet, the way a person moves when they do not want to be seen moving. She asked me where I had heard about the crooner. I told her the truth, that my grandfather had given me the rule and the name both, and that I had heard the old families talk about it when I was a boy, in the way grown people talk over a child's head about a thing they hope the child never meets. She nodded slowly. Then she told me her grandmother had been one of those old families. She told me her grandmother grew up in a hollow 2 ridges over from where we stood, a hollow that does not have a name anymore because everyone who could have remembered the name is gone. And she told me a story I had never heard, and I have worked these woods my whole life. She said that in her grandmother's day, the people who farmed these slopes did not sing while they worked the high fields. They sang in the valleys, by the river, where the water was loud. But up on the ridges, near the deep timber, they kept silent. A child who hummed at his chores got his ear pulled. A woman who caught herself singing a hymn while she hung the wash would stop in the middle of a word and not finish it. They were not a joyless people, Audrey said. They simply understood something that the rest of us have been lucky enough to forget. They understood that the deep timber was listening, and that it was learning, and that everything you taught it would one day be used against the people you loved. She told me her grandmother had a brother, a boy of 9. He went up to bring the goats in one evening, and the goats came back without him. And for 3 nights afterward, his mother heard him calling from the tree line, just out of sight, calling for his supper, calling for his bed, calling in a voice that was his voice exactly except for the patience in it, because a real hungry child is never patient, and this one had all the time in the world. On the 3rd night, the mother could not stand it anymore, and she opened the door, and she answered him. Audrey did not tell me what happened after that. She did not have to. She just looked at me with those quick old eyes and said that her grandmother lived to be 91 and never once in all those years called out to anyone in the woods. Not a hunting partner, not a lost dog, not a single soul. She would walk all the way up to a man and tap him on the shoulder rather than call his name across open timber. I asked Audrey why she was coming up here at all, if she carried a story like that inside her. She said, "Because it has been quiet for a long time." She said, "My grandmother always told me it sleeps for years, and you can almost forget, and that is exactly when you should not." She said, "I have a feeling, Ranger, I have had it for a week, and I would rather be up there with them when it wakes than down here wondering." I have thought about that answer every day since. She did not come up the mountain because she had forgotten the rule. She came up because she remembered it better than anyone alive, and she loved those 5 people enough to walk into the thing she feared most, on the chance that one of them might walk back out. I did not understand that at the trailhead. I understand it now. I should have turned them around right there. I want you to understand that I have asked myself 1,000 times why I did not. The truth is that they were not breaking a single rule. They were 6 grown adults with a valid permit and good boots, and the sky was clear, and I had no reason in the world to stop them except an old saying and the look on one woman's face. If you have ever ignored a feeling like that, you already know how this part ends. And if you are still with me, do me one small thing before we climb any higher up that trail. You have not tapped that like button yet, and I can see the count sitting there. Press it now, while we are still standing in the sunlight, because I promise you that you do not want to be reaching for anything once the singing starts. I watched them go up the Calder Gap Trail at 2 in the afternoon. Beth turned around once and waved at me. I waved back. That is the last time I saw any of them clean. What I know about the next 2 days, I know mostly from a recorder, because Audrey Hughes carried one too. She wore a little machine on a cord around her neck, the same as mine, and she had it running far more often than any of them realized. I think, at the end, she knew exactly what she was recording. I think she wanted someone to hear. That first evening they made camp at the old meadow below Saddle Rock, right where the permit told them to. The recording from that night is ordinary for a long while. You hear them setting up, you hear the snap of poles and the hiss of a stove. You hear Calvin telling the same story he told me, and the others laughing because they had heard it 11 summers running and it had become a kind of family prayer. You hear Naomi tease Eugene about the way he always packs an extra cup, one more than he needs, and you hear Eugene go quiet, and you understand without being told that the extra cup used to belong to his wife. You hear other things too. Small things, the things that make a person real to you even after they are gone. You hear Beth ask twice whether the food is hung high enough, and Randall tell her twice that it is, with the patience of a man who has answered the same question from the same frightened person for a decade and loves her for it. You hear Naomi humming under her breath as she washes the pots in the creek, and you hear Audrey, sharp, quiet, tell her to stop. Not loud, not unkind, just Naomi, honey, not up here. And Naomi laughs and says, not you too. And Audrey does not laugh back. And Naomi stops humming, and for one moment on that recording the whole meadow seems to hold its breath. And then a frog starts up again, and the moment passes, and they all go back to being 6 tired, happy people under a clear sky. You hear Randall tell them all to get some sleep. You hear Beth zip her tent 3 times, checking, checking, checking. You hear the fire pop and settle. You hear the ordinary, enormous quiet of a mountain night, the kind of quiet I have loved my whole life, the kind I went into this work to be near. And then, at the very edge of the file, just before Audrey turned the machine off, you hear something that is not any of them. It is far away. It is up the slope, deeper in, where no trail goes and no person should be. It is a voice, and it is humming, not words, just a tune, low and slow and sweet, the kind of thing a mother hums to a child who will not settle. It lasts maybe 6 seconds. Then the file ends. I have played those 6 seconds more times than I should have. Every time I tell myself it is the wind. Every time I am lying to a man who knows me too well to believe it. The second recording begins the next night, and it is not ordinary at all. By then they had walked deeper than the permit allowed. I can tell from the sounds. The meadow night has frogs and a wide open hush. The second night has close timber, the creak of old growth, the absence of frogs that means you have climbed past where the water sits. They had gone up and in, off the marked trail, and I have spent a long time trying to understand why 6 careful people would do that. I think the singing led them. I think it had been calling all day, soft, just under the noise of their own footsteps, and they had followed it the way you follow a song stuck in your head, without ever deciding to. There is a stretch of the second night's recording, near the start, where they talk about the day, and from it I have pieced together how they came to be so far from where they should have been. It started small. Eugene heard water that was not on any map, off to the left of the trail, and he wanted to fill his bottles there because the marked spring had been low. So they stepped off, just for a minute, and the water sound moved. It got no closer no matter how far they walked toward it, the way the creek would later move on me. And by the time they realized it, the trail was gone behind them. Then Beth heard a phone. Out there, miles from any signal, where she knew there could not be a phone, she heard the exact ringtone of her sister down in the valley, the sister she had argued with before the trip and not made up with, and it was ringing from up the slope, patient, over and over, never going to voicemail. She knew it was impossible. She said so, and then she walked toward it anyway, just a little, just to be sure. And the others followed her because you do not let the nervous one wander off alone. That is how it works, I have come to believe. It does not drag you. It does not chase you. It finds the one sound in all the world that you cannot leave unanswered, the voice you have been aching to hear, and it sets that sound a little higher up the slope, and a little higher, and a little deeper in, and it lets your own heart do the rest. By the time they understood they were lost, they had walked the better part of a day up and in, off every trail, into timber so old and close that the afternoon went to a green gloom under it, and the birds had stopped, and there was no water anywhere except the water they could hear and never reach. You can hear Randall trying to hold them together. His voice is the steady one. He says they will make camp here, get their bearings at first light, walk back down to the trail in the morning. He says it the way a captain says a thing he does not fully believe, to keep the boat from rocking. That is the first layer of what he says. Underneath it, in the tightness of his breath, you can hear the second layer. He is afraid, and he is 72, and he is realizing that for the first time in 50 years this mountain does not know him. They get the tents up. The stove hisses. For a while it is almost normal. Then Calvin says, very clearly, that he can hear his daughter. Now, I had spoken with Calvin for half an hour at that trailhead, and I knew a few things about him. I knew he had no children. He had told me, grinning, that he was nobody's father and never would be, and that he liked it that way. So when his voice comes across that recording soft and wondering, saying that he can hear his little girl out there in the trees, calling for him, the bottom drops out of my stomach every time. Naomi tells him to stop. You can hear the nurse in her, the calm that is built to hold other people steady. She tells him he is tired, that the elevation does things, that there is no child out there. But the voice keeps on, and here is the part I want you to sit with. On the recording you can hear it too. It is a girl. Small, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She is calling a name, and the name is Daddy, and she is laughing between the calls the way children do when they think they are playing a game and winning. It comes from the slope above the camp, where the timber goes black between the trunks. It is the sweetest sound in the world, and it is wrong in a way I cannot put into language, because it is too sweet, and it is too patient, and it never once gets closer or farther away. It just circles, the way a thing circles when it is in no hurry at all. Audrey's voice comes in then, low and shaking. She says the one thing nobody wanted to hear. She says, "That is not a child," and then she says the rule. She says it almost word for word the way I had said it at the trailhead, the way my grandfather said it to me. Do not answer it. Whatever it sounds like, whatever it calls you, you keep your mouth shut, because it does not have a voice of its own. It only has the voices we give it. And the moment you answer, you have given it yours. I want to tell you that they listened to her. I want to tell you that 6 grown adults, warned twice, sat in their tents with their teeth together and waited for the sun. Calvin stood up and walked toward the trees. You can hear it on the recording. You can hear Randall lunge after him and miss. You can hear Naomi screaming his name, which I think was the worst mistake of that whole night, because now the woods had her voice too. You can hear Calvin laughing, calling back to the little girl who was not a little girl, saying he was coming, saying, "Hold on, sweetheart, I am right here." And then the singing changed. I have listened to a great many sounds in these forests. I have heard a bear take down an elk. I have heard a man die of a heart attack a mile from any help. None of it is on the same shelf as what comes next on that recording. The sweet humming dropped, all at once, into something low and vast and glad. It was the sound of a thing that had been hungry for a long time and was finally being fed. It came from everywhere. It came from inside the ground. And under it, just for a moment, you can hear Calvin Price stop laughing. Then there is no more Calvin. Not a scream, not a struggle. Just an absence where a man used to be, and the woods crooning over it, satisfied. The recording goes quiet for 90 seconds. You can hear them breathing in their tents. You can hear Beth crying without making a sound, which is a thing nervous people learn to do young. You can hear Eugene praying, low, the same line over and over, the way a man prays when he has run out of new words and only the old ones still hold. You can hear Randall, after a while, begin to give orders again. And this is the part that breaks my heart the most, because he was trying so hard to be the captain when the boat was already under. He told them, in a voice scraped down to nothing, that at first light they were going to walk downhill, and only downhill, no matter what they heard, because water runs down and the trail follows the water, and the rule was to get to the water. He made each of them say it back to him, downhill to the water. He made Beth say it twice. You can hear her say it through her teeth, downhill to the water, downhill to the water, like a child learning a prayer she does not yet believe will save her. He told them, do not answer anything. He told them, I do not care if it sounds like your own mother. He told them, Calvin is gone, and Calvin is gone because he answered, and not one more of us is going to answer. He said it like a man and a leader and a friend, and for a few minutes on that recording it almost feels like they might make it, like the worst had already happened and the dawn would come and find 5 of them alive. And then the singing starts again, and this time it is not a child. This time it is a woman humming a tune that is gentle and familiar and old. And Eugene Fisher makes a sound I have never been able to listen to twice, because Eugene knows that tune. It is the one his wife used to hum in their kitchen. It is the one he has not heard in 3 years, since the morning he found her and the cup on the counter went cold. And the woods are giving it back to him, perfect, every note, because somewhere on some other night some other grieving person taught it to the trees, or because the thing simply reached into Eugene and took it, the way it had taken the shape of Calvin's daughter from a man who never had one. Naomi grabs him. You can hear the struggle. You can hear her telling him, no, Eugene, no, that is not her. She is gone. You know she is gone. Do not go out there. You can hear Audrey's recorder swing on its cord as she throws herself across the tent to help hold him down. And you can hear Eugene Fisher, soft-spoken Eugene, who had not raised his voice once in 2 days, begin to hum back. He only meant to answer her. I understand that now. He was 64 and tired and so very alone, and the love of his life was singing to him out of the night, and all he wanted was to sing back one time. One small kindness, one note for the woman he had buried. He hummed 4 notes. The recording captures all 4. On the 5th, the woods stopped being patient. I found them on the morning of the 4th day. I went up because they were a day overdue at the trailhead, and because I had not slept since I waved at Beth Cooper. I went up off the marked trail, following sign that should not have led where it led, up and into timber I had walked 100 times and did not recognize at all. The compass turned in my hand. The water sound that should have guided me down kept moving, the way the singing had moved on the recording, circling in no hurry. I kept my grandfather's rule the whole way. I kept my teeth together. I hummed nothing. I did not call their names, not once, no matter how badly I wanted to, because I had a feeling in my gut by then that calling a name in those woods was the same as ringing a dinner bell. I have walked into a lot of bad places in this work. I have gone in after lost children, and after men who did not want to be found, and after the kind of weather that kills people in an hour. Nothing prepared me for the feeling of those trees. It was not fear exactly, or not only fear. It was the feeling of being expected. The feeling of walking into a room where everyone has stopped talking because they were talking about you. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, until even my own boots seemed to make no sound, as if the forest had reached down and taken the noise out of them, the way it takes everything, to learn it, to keep it, to give it back later when it will hurt the most. Twice, on the way up, I heard something call to me. The first time it was a voice I will not describe, a voice from a long time ago, a voice I would have walked off a cliff to hear again on any other day of my life. I kept my teeth together. I kept walking. The second time it was Beth Cooper, calling for the ranger, calling for help, sounding so frightened and so alive that my whole body turned toward it before my mind could stop me. And I almost answered. God forgive me, I had the breath in my chest and her name on my tongue. But I thought of Audrey's grandmother walking all the way up a slope to tap a man on the shoulder rather than call across open timber, and I closed my mouth, and I walked on, and the calling fell behind me, disappointed, patient, in no hurry at all. I want to tell you what I found, but I am going to tell you only what I can. I found the camp below a slope where the trees grew wrong, leaning inward, all of them bent toward a single point on the ground as if they had spent 100 years listening to something underneath. I have never seen anything like those trees, before or since, and I have looked at a great many trees in my life. They were old, far older than the timber around them, and their bark was smooth in a way bark should not be, worn smooth the way a doorstep gets worn smooth, the way a thing gets worn smooth by being touched in the same place over and over for longer than a person can imagine. The ground beneath them was bare. Nothing grew there, not a fern, not a weed, not a blade of anything. And the quiet in that place was the deepest quiet I have ever stood inside. It was not the quiet of a forest at rest. It was the quiet of a thing that is full, and resting, and listening even in its sleep. Randall Simmons was sitting upright against a trunk with his old root hands folded in his lap, and he had died with his eyes open and his jaw set, and I believe to this day that he died refusing to answer. He never gave it his voice. He just sat there and held the line until his heart gave out. The last captain of a boat that had already gone down around him. There was not a mark on him. There was only that set jaw, that locked silence, and I knelt in front of him a long time because I wanted him to know, wherever he was, that one of us had understood exactly what he had done, and what it had cost him, and that it had mattered. Beth Cooper I found 100 yards up the slope. I will not describe it. I will only tell you that she had run, and that she had almost made it to running water, and that she was so close that I could hear the creek myself when I knelt down beside what was left of her. So close. The rule was true. It was just not enough for her, because the thing had her brother's voice by then, and it had called her the whole way. And a person can only keep their teeth together for so long before love opens their mouth. Naomi Ward and Eugene Fisher I did not find at all. There was a place where the ground was disturbed, near the point all the trees leaned toward, and there was the strap of a recorder snagged on a low branch. And that is where Audrey's machine had finally come to rest. But of Naomi, who spent her life keeping the dying calm, and of Eugene, who only wanted to hum to his wife one more time, there was nothing. Audrey Hughes was alive. I found her at the creek. She had done exactly what I had told them at the trailhead, exactly what her grandmother must have told her once, the same words coming down the same way mine had come down to me. She had walked to running water, and she had sat in the middle of the cold creek with the current breaking around her. And she had kept her mouth shut for 2 days while the woods sang to her in every voice she had ever loved. She had not answered any of them, not her late husband, not her son who died in the service, not the small sweet voice that I will not name. She gave the woods nothing, and so the woods could not take her, and that is the whole of the rule and the whole of why I am able to tell you any of this. I got her down the mountain. It took most of a day, and she could not walk well, and I carried her the last 2 miles on my back with her recorder swinging against my chest. She did not speak the entire way. She has not spoken much since. There is a quiet that comes over people who have been through the worst kind of thing, a quiet that is not peace, that is more like a held breath that never gets let out, and Audrey has lived inside that quiet ever since I pulled her out of that creek. She sits by her window in the valley now, where the river is loud, and I go and see her when I can, and we do not talk about it, and we both listen to the water, and I think we are both grateful, in a way neither of us could say out loud, for how loud it is. But before I took the recorder from around her neck, she held my arm, and she looked at me with those quick old eyes, and she said the only thing she said to me that day. She said, I think I hummed, just once. When I was so cold, I forgot myself. She said, I think it hurt me. I told her she was confused. I told her the cold does things, that she had held the line, that she was the one who lived. I believed it when I said it. I want you to know that I believed it. I have the recording in a locked drawer at the station. Audrey's whole record of those 2 nights. I have listened to nearly all of it, more times than is good for a person, looking for the thing she was afraid of, the 4 soft notes she thinks she gave away in the cold. I never found them in her file. I found them in mine, because here is the part I have not told you. I carry a recorder too. I have for 30 years, and it was running on my belt the whole way up that mountain and the whole way down, the way it always is, catching bird song and wind and the creak of old growth out of pure habit. I did not even think about it. It is as much a part of me as my own hands by now, and a man does not think about his hands. I played it back a week later, expecting nothing. My own footsteps, my own breathing, the creak. I had it on in the background while I did paperwork at the station, half listening, the way you do. The first hour is exactly what I expected. The climb, the 2 calls I did not answer, faint and far. The water, Audrey weeping when I reached her. All of it just as I remembered, which was its own small comfort, proof that I had held the line, proof that I had given those woods nothing. And then, in the last minutes before I reached Audrey, where I know for a certainty that I kept my teeth together and hummed nothing and gave those woods not one sound of my own, there is a voice on my recording. It is humming, low and slow and sweet. The kind of thing a mother hums to a child who will not settle. It is my voice. I never made that sound. I would swear it on my grandfather's grave. But the woods give back any sound you give them, and I have come to understand that they are patient, and that they do not always give it back the same week or the same year, and that a man can walk out of those trees believing he held the line, and not know for a long time what he taught them while he was inside. I do not play that file past the 90-second mark, because at the 90-second mark, the humming on my own recorder stops being a tune. At the 90-second mark, it starts to say my name, and it says it the way a child says it, patient, in no hurry at all. The way a thing says a name when it already knows that one night when you are cold enough to forget yourself, you are finally going to answer. So when you are out in the high country this summer, and the sun goes down, and you hear something singing from up the slope where no trail goes, you remember the only rule that has ever mattered up here. The woods will give you back any sound you give them. Keep your teeth together. Walk toward the water, and whatever it sounds like, whatever it calls you, whoever you have lost, do not sing back. The last thing Clara Wallace said to me before she walked into the trees was thank you. People do not usually thank the one who failed to save them. I have turned that word over every night for 6 years, and I still cannot tell you whether it was kindness or a warning she meant to outlive her. I have worked the high country of these mountains for most of my life. I know the trails the way other people know the rooms of their own house, in the body more than the mind, so that my feet find the turns before my eyes do. I have carried hikers off ledges. I have hauled out men twice my weight. I learned the difference between the sound a deer makes in the brush and the sound a person makes, and I learned that the most dangerous thing on a mountain is almost never the mountain. It is what people carry up here inside themselves. That is what I believed anyway before the autumn I am going to tell you about. I do not believe it anymore. They came up on the 3rd week of October, 6 of them, a walking club out of the valley towns, who had been doing one long trip together every year for almost 2 decades. Ross Barnes had organized it. He was 46, broad across the shoulders, the kind of man who reads 2 guidebooks and decides he understands a place. He had the permits in a plastic sleeve and he showed them to me at the trailhead like a boy showing a hall pass. I liked him. I want that on the record. I liked all of them, and that has made it worse, not better. Sheila Foster was 59 and she did the talking when Ross ran out of breath, which was often. She had a laugh that came up out of her like water out of a spring, easy and without warning, and she used my first name before I had finished giving it. Stanley Diaz was 71 and he moved slow, but he never stopped moving, and I have come to understand that those are the people who outlast the rest of us on a mountain, the slow ones who do not quit. Wendy Myers was the youngest at 34, quiet, a camera always in her hands, and I noticed her because she was the only one who looked up at the ridgeline instead of down at the path. Gordon Hamilton was 62 and a worrier, the man who counts the headlamps twice, and then there was Clara. Clara Wallace was 77 years old, and she had been born in a hollow 9 miles south of where we stood, in a cabin that is not there anymore. She told me that within the first minute, the way some old people tell you the important thing first, in case there is not time for the rest. Her people had farmed these slopes and buried their dead in these slopes and left when the work left. and she had come back, she said, to walk the ridge one more time while her knees still allowed it. I should have read more into that than I did. We did the safety talk at the trailhead. I gave them the usual: stay on the marked path, filter your water, if you get separated, stop walking and stay put, because a person who stops is found and a person who keeps moving is lost. They nodded along the way. Groups always nod, half listening, already smelling the wood smoke of the night ahead. And then Clara, who had been quiet, put her hand on my arm. She said, "My grandmother had a rule for this mountain that she never wrote down. She said the mountain only owns what you turn around to look at. Keep your eyes on the trail ahead, and the trail ahead is yours. But if something walks behind you and you turn to see its face, you have handed it your face in return, and it will keep it." She smiled when she said it, the way you smile at a story you do not fully believe but would not say so out loud. Sheila laughed her spring water laugh. Ross said something about old wives and old hills, and I, who should have known better, I tucked it away as the kind of charming local saying I would repeat to the next group, and I walked them up into the gap. The first day was clean. The trail to the high camp runs along a creek for 3 miles and then climbs out of the hollow onto a ridge that gives you the whole valley going gold and red below you. And I watched all 6 of them stop at the same place at the overlook and go silent, even Sheila, even Ross. There is a moment when the country opens up under you like that, and people stop pretending. Wendy raised her camera and then lowered it without taking the picture. She told me later she could not make it fit in the frame. Some things will not be made small enough to carry away. We reached the high camp an hour before the light went. It sits in a flat saddle between 2 ridges, ringed with old growth that the loggers never reached because the slope is too steep to take them out. The trees up there are bigger than anything in the valley, big enough that 2 people cannot join hands around them, and they grow so close that even at midday the floor of that forest holds a kind of permanent gray gloom, a cool green underwater light that does not change much from dawn to dusk. I had camped in that saddle 40 or 50 times. It had never bothered me before. But that evening, as we set the tents and Stanley got a fire going with a patience that put my own to shame, I caught myself counting the trees. I do not know why. I had walked among them for 20 years and never once felt the need to count them, and now I stood there in the falling light and counted the trunks at the edge of the clearing, and I got to 41, and then I looked away to answer something Gordon asked me, and when I looked back I counted again and got 43. I told myself I had miscounted. That is the thing about the start of it. Every single sign, taken alone, has an ordinary answer. You miscounted. The light is strange. You are tired. Your eyes are old. It is only later, when you lay the ordinary answers in a row, that you see they were never separate things at all. They were one thing, and it was patient, and it was counting us back. The fire was good that night. Sheila had brought a flask of something, and it went around, and even Clara took a swallow. Stanley told a story about a job he had worked 40 years ago, and Gordon corrected 3 details of it, and Stanley let him, smiling, because that was their friendship and had been for a long time. Wendy sat a little apart with her knees drawn up and watched the tree line over the top of the flames. I sat down beside her because a ranger learns to sit beside the quiet one. She said, "Do you ever feel like the woods are fuller at night?" I said, "Everybody feels that. Sound carries different in the cold. Your ears do half your seeing for you out here." She said, "No, not the sound." She nodded at the trees, at the gray spaces between the trunks where the firelight reached and stopped. "I keep thinking there is a tree standing there that was not there a minute ago," she said. "And then I look, and it is just a tree. But it is one more than there was." I did not tell her about my own count. I wish now that I had. I have learned that the worst thing you can do to a frightened person is let them believe they are the only one who sees it. Loneliness is the door the fear comes through. Clara did not laugh with the others that night. While Sheila's flask went around, she sat with her hands open in her lap and she watched the gap in the trees where the firelight failed, and once, when she thought no one was looking, I saw her lips move the way they would move later on the ridge. A few names spoken to herself like a woman testing whether a lock still turns. I asked her, quiet, what her grandmother had meant about the looking. She said the looking is a door, and a face is the key, and most people give the key away because nobody ever told them they were holding one. She said her grandmother had walked these slopes her whole life, and died in her own bed at 94 with her eyes forward, and that was not luck, that was knowing the rule and keeping it through every long night for 80 years. Then she looked at me across the coals and she said, "You keep it too, Ranger, you will need it before this trip is done." I thought she was an old woman enjoying the chill of a campfire story. I have learned since that some people are not enjoying it at all. Some people are telling you exactly what is coming. in the only language the rest of us will sit still long enough to hear. Around the middle of the night I woke in my tent with the particular certainty that I had been woken by something, the way you do, with the dream still draining out of you and your heart already up at a run before your mind has caught up to ask why. The fire was down to coals. The clearing was full of that high country cold that gets into the bones. And there was a figure standing between my tent and Stanley's. I want to be careful here because this is where people stop believing me, and I do not blame them. I would not have believed me either the week before. It was a person shape, tall, taller than a tall man, and thin, and it was the wrong kind of solid. It was not a shadow cast by something because there was nothing to cast it and nowhere for the light to come from to cast it. It was a piece of the night that had decided on a shape. It had a head and shoulders and the long drop of a body, and it had no face, no eyes, no edge where it stopped being itself and started being the trees, and it was standing very still, and it was, I understood with a certainty that turned my stomach to water, looking at me. I did not move. I lay there with my eyes half open and my breath held until my lungs burned, and somewhere in the animal part of me Clara's grandmother spoke. Keep your eyes on the trail ahead. Do not turn and look at its face. I did not have a trail. I had a tent ceiling and a thing in the gap. So I did the only thing the rule allowed me. I closed my eyes. I lay in the cold with my eyes shut and my heart slamming, and I refused to look at it, and after a length of time I cannot measure, the cold eased, and the certainty of being watched lifted off me like a hand coming off the back of my neck. When I opened my eyes, the gap between the tents was empty. In the morning I told myself it was a dream. The coals, the cold, the flask, the old woman's story working on me in my sleep. I told myself that with real conviction. And then I crawled out of my tent into the gray underwater light of that forest, and Stanley Diaz was standing at the edge of the clearing in his sleeping clothes with his bare feet in the frost, facing into the trees, and he had been standing there, Gordon told me, his voice shaking, for the better part of an hour, and he would not answer when we called his name. I went to him slow. You learn that with people who have gone somewhere inside themselves. You do not grab. You come up alongside, and you let them know your shape is there, and you wait for them to come back to the surface on their own. Stanley, I said, Stan, it is morning. Come back to the fire. He did not turn his head. His eyes were open and fixed on a point in the gray between the trees, the way Wendy had stared the night before, but worse, deeper, and his lips were moving. I leaned in close to hear, and the cold coming off him was not the cold of a man who has stood in the frost. It was a draining cold, a cold that reached out and took the warmth from my own face when I got near him, and the words he was saying over and over under his breath, so quiet I had to put my ear almost to his mouth, were these. It is still here. It is still here. It went where I looked, and it is still here. I got him back to the fire. We wrapped him in everything we had, and Sheila held his hands between hers and rubbed them and talked to him in the low, steady voice you use on a spooked animal, and slowly, over an hour, he came back up into his eyes. But he was not all the way back. Something had been left behind in the trees, or taken out of him into the trees, and the Stanley who sat by our fire after that was a smaller man, a man with a piece missing, and he flinched at the edges of his own vision for the rest of the time I knew him. Ross wanted to push on. I want you to understand that he was not a fool for wanting that. By the cold light of morning, with the birds going and the frost burning off, the only solid fact we had was that an old man had sleepwalked and gotten chilled, and the rest was a story an even older woman had told and a bad dream a ranger had refused to talk about. Ross was protecting his trip from going to pieces over nothing. That is a reasonable man's instinct. The trouble with reasonable men is that the mountain does not grade on reason. I made the call to turn back. I told them we were aborting and heading down, and I told them we would move together in a tight line and that nobody was to leave the group for any reason. Gordon argued the timeline and I cut him off. Sheila looked at my face and stopped Ross before he started, and I have been grateful to her for that ever since, because we lost enough time as it was, and every minute on that ridge cost us. Here is the thing about going down a mountain when something is wrong. The way down feels longer than the way up. On the way up you are climbing toward a thing you chose. On the way down you are walking away from a thing that did not give you permission to leave, and the trail you walked so easily the day before has changed its mind about you. We had 3 miles along the ridge and then 3 miles down the creek to the trailhead, and the ridge came first, and the ridge was where the gray light lived. We had not gone half a mile before I understood we were being followed. I did not see them, not at first. I felt them, the way Wendy had described, the sense of fullness at the edges of the world, the count that would not stay still. Every time the trail bent and I could see the line of us strung out behind, I counted 6 and then myself and got 7, and that was right. And then I would face forward and walk, and the certainty would build in me that there were more of us than there should be, that something tall and thin was keeping the pace of the group just inside the trees, matching us stride for stride, and that if I turned my head it would be there in the gray with no face, waiting for me to give it mine. I did not turn my head. I called it back along the line. Eyes forward, eyes on the pack in front of you. Do not look into the trees. Do not look behind you. Sheila took it up and passed it back. Eyes forward, and we went down that ridge like a line of people walking a plank, each of us staring at the back of the one ahead. And the thing in the trees kept pace, and the gray light did not lift. Wendy was ahead of me, and I watched her shoulders, and past her shoulders I watched the trees, and I made the mistake of letting my eyes drift 1 degree off the back of her pack and into the gray. I saw them, not one. The trunks of that forest stood in their ranks the way trees stand, and between the trunks, in the spaces that should have held only more gray, stood the shapes, tall and thin and faceless, one to a gap, still as the trees and spaced as evenly as the trees, a second forest standing inside the first. Every one of them was turned toward the trail, toward us, and not one of them moved. I snapped my eyes back to the pack in front of me so hard that my neck cracked. I did not count them. You do not count a thing like that. You do not give it the dignity of a number. But I knew, the way you know the depth of water you have fallen into before your feet ever find the bottom, that there were more of them than there were trees, and that they had been standing there the whole time, since the first night, since the trailhead, since before us, and that the only thing between us and them was the thin discipline of frightened people refusing to turn their heads. If you have come this far down the trail with me and your thumb has not yet found that like button, I am asking you to press it now, here, at this exact turn in the path, because what happened next is the part I have carried alone for 6 years and the part I have never once been able to say out loud, and I would rather not say it to an empty room. It took Gordon first. He was the worrier. He was the one who counted the headlamps twice, and that, I think now, was what undid him, because a worrier cannot keep his eyes forward. A worrier has to check. We came to a place where the trail crosses a slide of loose rock, an open scar on the ridge where the trees pull back and the gray gives way for 40 feet to honest gray sky, and crossing it we were strung out and slow, picking our footing, and Gordon was behind me, and Gordon heard something in the trees we had just left, and Gordon turned around to count us. I heard him stop. That is all. The sound of boots on scree stopping. And when I looked back, against my own rule, I broke it for half a second to look back. Gordon Hamilton was standing in the middle of the slide with his body turned toward the tree line, and there was a figure standing in front of him at the edge of the trees, taller than him, thin, faceless, and it was not touching him. I need you to hear that. It never touched any of them. It stood in front of Gordon at arm's length, and Gordon looked into the place where its face should have been, and I watched the color go out of him. Not his face, the color, the warmth, the thing that tells you a body has a life in it. It went out of him like a tide going out, fast, and his knees folded, and he sat down on the rock with his eyes still open and still fixed on it, and he did not get up. Sheila screamed his name. I caught her before she could go to him, because going to him meant looking at it, and I dragged her forward across the rest of the slide with her fighting me the whole way, and behind us Gordon sat on the scree in the gray light and did not move, and the figure stood over him and did not move, and the gap between them and us got wider, and I did not look back again. I have spent 6 years not knowing if he was dead on that slide or if he got up afterward and walked into the trees the way Clara would. I will never know. The search teams never found him. They never found any of the ones we lost. That is the part the reports cannot hold, that a mountain can take a 62-year-old man off an open slide in clear morning light and leave nothing, not a boot, not a trekking pole, not a single thread, as if he had been not killed but unwritten. We ran after that. There is no dignity in it, and I will not pretend there was. 6 of us had come down onto that slide and 5 of us came off it, and we ran, and the gray closed back over the trail and the thing came with us. I could hear it now, or feel it as a sound, a sort of pressure that moved through the trees on both sides, no longer one figure but a fullness, a crowd of the same shape, the woods grown thick with them, and Wendy was sobbing as she ran. Wendy went down once. Her foot caught a root and she sprawled forward onto the trail. And the sound that came out of her was not the sound of a person who has fallen. It was the deep tearing sound a body makes when it has decided it is going to die. And as she pushed herself up, her head began to turn, slow, helpless, toward the trees on her left, toward the fullness, the way a flower turns to find the light. I have never moved faster in my life than I moved to get my hand over her eyes. I clamped my palm across her face from behind, and I put my mouth to her ear, and I gave her the only thing I had. The trail, Wendy, the trail is yours. Look at the trail. I felt her whole body fighting my hand, fighting to turn, fighting to look. Because that is the thing about it. It does not reach for you. It makes you want to reach for it. I held her face forward and I walked her down the next 40 feet half blind with my hand over her eyes until the wanting passed out of her and she came back to herself and took her own weight again. She has never thanked me for it, and I am glad of that, because there are some kindnesses that should never be thanked out loud. Stanley, old Stanley, slow Stanley, was somehow still with us, still moving, because he did not quit. And Clara was not running. I noticed it the way you notice a sound stopping. The old woman had fallen back, and she was not running, she was walking. Steady, upright, her eyes forward on the trail exactly as she had told me to keep mine, and she was talking, not to us. She was talking to the trees, low and even, in a cadence I half recognized, and I realized she was saying names. She was saying names into the gray, one after another, a long roll of names, and I understood without being told that they were the names of her dead, her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, the people who had farmed these slopes and buried their dead in these slopes, and she was speaking them out into the trees the way you speak to a guard dog you have known since it was a pup, to remind it whose blood you are. And the trees around Clara were emptying. The fullness drew back from her. The figures pulled away from the old woman the way the cold had pulled off me the night I closed my eyes, and a clear space opened around her on the trail, and into that clear space the rest of us crowded like sheep, and we went down the last of the ridge inside the moving circle of Clara Wallace saying the names of her dead. And that is the only reason I am alive to tell you this. An old woman remembered who she was out loud, and the mountain remembered her people. And it let her pass, and it let us pass in her shadow because we were with her. We came off the ridge at the head of the creek with 4 of us still walking and 1 of us carried. Ross had gone down on the last steep pitch, not taken, just fallen. An ankle turned under him on a root, and Stanley and I had him between us, and Wendy went ahead breaking trail and Clara came behind, still talking, her voice gone to a rasp now, the names coming slower. And I could hear in the slowing that she was running out, that whatever she was spending to keep the circle open was a thing that ran out. The creek was the first place the gray light let go of us. The trail drops off the ridge into the hollow, and the big old growth gives way to younger trees, birch and maple, trees with sky between them. And the moment we crossed into that ordinary October woods, the pressure came off my back so suddenly that I staggered. The fullness was gone. The count came right. I stopped and made myself stand and count, and there were 5 of us, and only 5, and not one more shape standing at the edge where the light changed. I thought we were clear. I let myself think it. We made the trailhead by early afternoon. I got Ross into the truck and got the radio going, and I will not walk you through the hours that came after, the search teams, the questions I could not answer in any way that did not sound like madness, the long official machinery that grinds up a thing like this and turns it into a folder. Gordon Hamilton, missing, presumed fallen, body unrecovered. That is the sentence the world had room for. I signed it. I have signed 20-some missing person reports in my career, and that is the only one where I knew the report was a lie and signed it anyway, because the truth had no box to go in. I stopped guiding overnight trips after that season. The district let me move to trail maintenance and gate counts and the long solitary work that keeps a man on the lower slopes, and nobody asked me why. Because everybody in the district had read the folder and nobody in the district wanted to be the one who said the folder was thin. We are practical people. We close the file and we restock the first aid kit and we tell the next group to filter their water. It is the only way to keep doing the work. But I noticed in the seasons after that I had started doing a thing I had never done before. Whenever I passed the mouth of a trail that climbed up into the old growth, I would say a name, just one, Gordon's usually. Out loud, under my breath, the way another man might tip his hat to a grave. I told myself it was grief. I know better now. I was keeping the rule the only way I had left, with the only name I owned, and it was not enough. And some buried part of me already knew it was not enough. Stanley Diaz never came right. He went home to the valley, and he stopped sleeping in his bedroom because his window faced the mountains, and he could not, he told his daughter, abide a window that faced the mountains. He passed 2 winters later in his sleep, in a chair, in a room with the curtains drawn, and his daughter wrote me a letter I still have. She said her father told her, near the end, that he was not afraid to go because the thing that had been waiting for him since that morning in the frost was going to get its piece either way, and he would rather hand it over on his own porch than up on the ridge. Sheila Foster does not walk in the woods anymore. Wendy Myers does. I have come to think Wendy is the strongest of all of us because she went back. She went back the next autumn, alone, against everything I said to her, and she stood at the overlook where she had not been able to fit the country into her camera, and she took the picture and she sent it to me. It is just the valley going gold. There is nothing in it. But I keep it because she did the one thing none of the rest of us could do. She turned around and faced the mountain, and the mountain let her keep her face. And Clara Wallace did not get in the truck. I had Ross in the cab, and I turned to wave the rest of them in, and there were 4 of us at the trailhead, and Clara was not among them. She was standing at the place where the trail comes out of the trees, at the seam between the bright, ordinary woods and the deeper green behind, and she was looking back up the way we had come, which she had told all of us never to do. I called to her. She turned her head and she looked at me, and her face was not afraid. That is what I cannot get past. Her face was the face of a person who has finished a long piece of work and is satisfied with it. She said, "Somebody has to stay and keep saying the names." She said, "It remembers me and it will keep remembering me as long as I am here to remind it, and if I leave, the next people who come up will have nobody walking ahead of them." She said, "My grandmother kept it. Her grandmother kept it. I have known my whole life that it would come to me." I started toward her and she held up her hand, and there was such a plain authority in it that I stopped. A grown man, a ranger. I stopped at the lifted hand of a 77-year-old woman, and she said, "Thank you." That was the thank you. "Thank you," she said, "for getting them down." And then Clara Wallace turned and walked back up into the gray upright, her chin level, her eyes forward on a trail that was hers, saying the names of her dead into the trees, and the trees took her in the way still water takes a stone, without a splash, without a mark, and closed over the place where she had been. We searched for 9 days. Of course we did. We never found her. I did not expect to. You do not find a person who was not taken but went, who walked in not as prey but as a relief, a fresh voice to carry the old names so the mountain would keep its bargain a little longer. That is the whole of it. That is what happened on the ridge 6 years ago, and for 6 years I have told myself the wisdom held. Clara's grandmother was right. The mountain only owns what you turn around to look at, and I kept my eyes forward. And I came down, and I lived, and the rule was true. I told myself that until last week. Last week I was working late at the station, alone, writing up a season report at the desk under the one lamp, and the room was warm, and the door was shut, and the mountains were a black mass in the window that I have long since trained myself not to look at. And I had the sense, the old sense, the fullness at the edge, the count that will not stay still. I told myself it was a tired man alone in a small room. I kept my eyes on the page, I kept my eyes forward, the way I have kept them forward for 6 years, and my own shadow, thrown by the lamp onto the wall in front of me, where I could not help but see it, where keeping my eyes forward meant looking straight at it. My own shadow on the wall in front of me lifted its head. I had not moved. I was bent over the page, but the shadow on the wall straightened its neck and turned its head and looked back at me over its shoulder, slow, patient. The way you look at something you have been walking behind for a very long time and are finally ready to let see your face. I understand it now. I understand what Clara understood and what she was too kind to tell me. The rule was never protection. The rule was only a question of where. Keep your eyes forward, and the mountain will not take you on the mountain. It will take you at home, at your desk, in the warm room with the door shut, on a Tuesday years later, when you have stopped saying the names because you never knew them. When there is no old woman walking ahead of you anymore because she stayed up there so that you would not have to, and her voice is finally running out. It is still here. Stanley was right. It went where I looked, and it is still here. If you are out there in the gray right now, watching this in a tent in some high cold saddle with the trees too close and the count coming out wrong, then I have one thing to give you, the only thing I have left to give. Learn the names. Learn the names of your own dead and learn them well, because someday the rule will run out for you the way it ran out for me, and on that day the only thing that will buy you another year is a voice that remembers who it is, said out loud, into the trees that are leaning in to listen. Keep your eyes forward, and start saying the names now, while there is still someone walking ahead of you.